Autistic Tony Stark by ajexists. Book 1. Discovering Your True Self. Tony wasn't an idiot. He knew something had been, for lack of a better word, wrong with him since he was a young child. Yet he, his small group of friends, and his parents, especially his father, had always chalked it up to his genius and rich stature. Nothing could be wrong with him. He's Tony Stark. His hyper-focused interests were due to him being bred into engineering. His lack of social awareness was due to being an only child and growing up rich and famous. He couldn't make friends because he was younger than all his classmates, and you don't make friends in the business world. This never explained his weird repetitive movements, the out-of-the-blue tantrums he would have when everything just seemed too much, the way he could just talk engineering and science for hours non-stop, the fact that he has no idea how to interpret or cope with any of his feelings, or that looking someone in the eyes or touching someone's bare skin felt like he was burning alive. But that was all from his eccentric personality. Seriously, there was nothing wrong with Tony Stark. He made it by just fine, even if it was less than perfect or normal. He made his first friend at 15, became heavily addicted to drugs and alcohol, which he has thankfully become sober from. Didn't find true love till his 30s, and even then he messed up a lot. He hid away everything that was deemed undesirable or socially unacceptable. The only times he would let these parts out is when he was in the lab, in his element and completely free from the judgment of the world. It wasn't ideal, but it was necessary to keep up the image, make the press happy, and most important of all, not to be a burden to those few who care for him. Of course, a 15-year-old spider boy only had to come and change his whole world. Ever since the whole vulture fiasco, Tony decided to make the internship a real thing. He couldn't keep the kid away and have him get hurt again. So now, every Wednesday, Peter Parker comes down to the lab. It's been great. Mentoring Peter and sharing their same passions has been great. But again, Tony's not an idiot, and through many years of training he has become quite observant. Peter has these little quirks, not too dissimilar to Tony's, but he has elected to ignore it. He was extremely hypersensitive to lights and sounds, to the point where he sheepishly asked Tony to turn down the music Tony plays in the lab, which did upset him a bit because he needs his lab music. But anything for the kid. Peter doesn't pick up on his sarcasm almost all of the time, which has been difficult as sarcasm and jokes is Tony's main way of communication. He is constantly moving, constantly talking, like the kid doesn't know how to stop. And boy, can Tony relate, but again, we don't talk about that. And the pop culture references. Tony knows this generation is very much into meme culture, but it seems like Peter can only explain things through movies and TV shows. It's been quite a few months of Tony picking up on these quirks, yet he doesn't quite know how to approach this. Does he just ask up front? Should he wait for a better time? Is there going to be a better time? Maybe he should just ignore it and pretend nothing is. Mr. Stark? Tony broke out of his thinking and looked towards Peter, who had stopped tinkering on a circuit board to now chewing his lips and rubbing his fingers. Yeah, kid? Peter took a deep breath. I kind of want to tell you something. I have for a while, actually. I've just been really nervous and I didn't know how you would take it, and I really don't want to lose the internship over this, and... Slow down, kid, Tony interrupted. You're not losing the internship unless you've killed Rhodey or something. You're not losing this anytime soon. He spun his chair around so his whole body was facing Peter. So, what's up, kid? Peter kept chewing on his lips and migrated to rubbing his hands together. Well, you see, He took a deep breath and rushed out. I'm autistic. Tony was taken aback. He couldn't even hold back his shocked response. What? Peter's legs started bouncing. I'm autistic. No, I got that, Tony said. He swung his chair back and forth while thinking about. It's just, you're nothing like how it's shown. Peter let out a laugh, sounding a little hurt and shocked, and looked down. Yeah, autism is way more than that. I guess so, Tony muttered, then nodded. All right, that's fine with me, kid. I mean, I know autism is a lifelong thing, so if this is how you are, then it's certainly not going to affect our work. Yeah, just. Peter looked back up at Tony. Can you please do some research? Not from Autism Speaks, from real autistic people. It's just, I want you to know that it's really what it's really like, and I will explain now, but I'm honestly quite drained. But I promise another day you can ask me questions and I'll explain them. I just don't think I can right now, and I'll do my research, Pete. Tony smiled. I promise. Peter released a breath he was holding in and nodded. Thank you, Mr. Stark. Is it okay if I head back now? I don't have much energy left. He frowned. Tony nodded. Yeah, of course, Underoos. Rest up and I'll see you next week, all right? Okay? Tony smiled at him, patting his shoulder. Peter smiled back. Thank you, Mr. Stark. Seriously. No problem. He rolled back to his spot in the lab and said, Now rest up, shoo. He smirked as he watched Peter head out. Tony stood up and said, All right, Fry. Me whatever you can find about autism. None from Autism Speaks. Right away, boss. What the fuck? Tony's research started with a DSM-5. He wanted to see what qualifies to get a diagnosis, and holy shit. Of course he saw how Peter fit into the criteria, but what he was not expecting was for him to fit into it as well. A part of him thought, what if I am autistic? Then the rest of his brain shut that down immediately. A lot of these symptoms people without autism can have, so he's just like everyone else, right? He kept researching. He read about how the media's perception of autism can be inaccurate to a lot of people, that autism was a spectrum. He read about the symptoms and how they can present from person to person. He read about the updated terms and language on autism. He read how autism can present differently within boys and girls. The main difference is a thing called masking, and oh boy, did that send Tony down a mini spiral. He learnt that masking was to hide your autistic traits to make you seem more socially acceptable. Tony then thought about childhood, thinking back to the symptoms and how they presented in him. The times when he would have tantrums, no, meltdowns in public due to all the flashing lights and overlapping voices all shouting at him. We learned that to an autistic's brain, the stuff that causes them sensory issues can actually cause them pain. So that's why he couldn't look someone in the eye, or why he couldn't stand being touched unless he trusted and knew that person. It was all sensory issues. Why he was constantly moving. It was stimming. That's one reason he loved engineering so much. It gave him something to do with his hands, always busy work. It made sense he made his first friend in college. It wasn't only that he was younger than everyone else, he also didn't know how to make friends. The thing is, he went to a boarding school where everyone was rich and quite a few famous children, but even then he just couldn't seem to figure out the rules of socializing. Things only got worse, better, when he started reading about late diagnosed autistics, people who didn't get diagnosed until their teens, young adult, or full-fledged adulthood. Blogs telling stories that he had gone through, struggles that he related to, and posts that made him feel understood like never before. All this new information came crashing down on him, memories rushing back that just made sense now, and a whole load of feelings he couldn't process but finally knew why. He has autism. Tony Stark is autistic. What the fuck? Was the only thought that came to his mind as he took this all in. He didn't even notice someone walking in. Tony, I got an alert from Friday that you've been here for over 10 hours. What's going on? He walked into the lab, pajamas on, which clearly showed it was too late to stay in. She noted his face, which looked like he had had an amazing discovery, yet was hurt by it all at once. He hesitantly walked over. Honey? Tony took a shuddering breath, suddenly noticing the time to be 1:03 a.m. He turned to face Pepper, but did not look up at her. Do you know autism? Pepper furrowed her brows. Do I know autism? Yes, Tony, I know what autism is, she said, confused. Why do you ask? Tony sat in silence for a while, not knowing what to do. not knowing what to say. You know you're smart. Do you? Tony trailed off. Do I think you have it? Pepper filled in, voice quiet, as if she was any louder it would break him. She crouched down to his level, softly smiling as he nodded. Well, I'm not an expert on it, but I have wondered if you have Asperger's from time to time. Tony shook his head. Asperger's is an outdated term now, created by a Nazi. It's just autism now. Pepper chuckled and reached out to hold his hand. Then I have wondered if you have autism from time to time. I don't think it's a bad thing, by the way. Pony finally accepted her hands and she rubbed her thumb across his hands. You just experience the world a little differently. She squeezed his hands. Now how did this come about? The kid, Peter, Tony said. He told me he's autistic when we had lab. He asked me to research because I knew shit. But the more he paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. The more I researched, the more I started relating to it. Oh, honey. Pepper pulled Tony into a hug, both dropping to the ground so they can easily hold each other. It's okay, sweetheart. Being autistic is not a bad thing. In fact, it's great that you know this because now you can understand your struggles and how you can help them. She smiled and squeezed him tighter. This is good, Tony. You are good, Tony. I love you. Love you too, Tony whispered, and they melted into the hug, nuzzling into her shoulders as he let out his emotions. Feelings of relief, grief, anger, sadness, and complete and utter joy. He let them all out and took in the love and reassurance Pepper gave him. A while later, Pepper kissed his head and said, All right, it's almost 2 a.m. Let's get you to bed. Tony could only nod as he got up and went to bed. Next Wednesday came when both of them were a little nervous. Tony, because of this newfound revelation that has seemingly taken over his life in the past week, and Peter, because he has no idea what Tony has looked up, if any at all. So when Peter walked into their weekly lab time, the room was tense, both parties silent. Eventually, Tony spoke up. So, I did some research on your autism. Yeah? Peter asked, looking over at Tony, who was aggressively tinkering on some circuit boards. What did you find? Lots of things, Tony said, terrified to look at Peter at all. I caught up on all the new terminology that people use now, read up on the symptoms and how they present, lots of interesting and noteworthy things. Tony bit on his lip, setting down the circuit board and the tool. Yeah? Peter asked again. Did you read up on actually autistic people? Quite a bit, yeah. Tony slowly turned over towards Peter. I read a lot of posts from late diagnosed autistic people. Peter let out a small smile. You did? Tony nodded and took a deep breath. Peter, I thank you. Peter tilted his head. For what, Mr. Stark? For helping me. For helping me realize I have autism myself. Peter's jaw dropped, then formed into a smile. He bounced in his seat and flapped his hands. That's awesome, Mr. Stark. Tony let out a small laugh. Yeah, well, glad you think so, kid. No, really it is. I mean, yeah, autism can suck sometimes, but like, now I have an adult that I look up to that is autistic and I can talk to. I mean, if I'm being honest, I always thought you were autistic and just didn't like admitting it. Wait. Tony interrupted and stared at Peter. You thought I was autistic this whole time, and you never said anything. Peter bit his lip. Well, I didn't bring it up because I haven't told you yet, and I think someone you perceive as neurotypical telling you that you have a disability is a bit rude, so I didn't want to be rude, and, Peter giggled. Autistics have a radar that can easily detect other autistics. What? Like that gaydar shit you were telling me about? Tony smirked. Exactly that. Except instead of detecting dyed hairs and rainbows, you're detecting poor eye contact and loving bread. Peter burst out into a fit of laughter. Tony laughed along and rolled his eyes. You are something else, kid. The two fell back into a comfortable silence before Peter asked, You know autism is a disability, right? Tony's breath shuddered a little. While he was starting to get used to the autism label, disabled one was still a bit hard. Yeah, I know. I'll be honest, that's a bit hard to digest. Tony bit his cheek. Tony Stark was never supposed to be disabled. He was supposed to be perfect. Normal. Yeah, well, you're not, Peter put bluntly. And disabled isn't a bad word, Mr. Stark. I I get it. I was diagnosed in middle school, and coming to terms with my disability, it was hard. No one wants to be disabled. But what I do want is to live my best life possible, which means understanding how my autism presents and learning how to accommodate for the areas I do struggle in. I keep noise cancelling headphones on me at all times in case I get overwhelmed. I always make sure Aunt May keeps a couple of my safe foods in the apartment in case I can't eat anything else. I allow myself to stim freely and openly because it helps me process the world around me. It's gonna take a while, and it is not easy in the slightest. Unmasking and being who you truly are, it's such a relief. Tony felt speechless. He took in everything that Peter was saying. Damn, this kid was too mature for his age. He felt himself tear up, but instead of hiding away, he let the tears fall. He got up and walked over to Peter, pulling him into a hug. Oh, Peter said in shock, then smiled and hugged him back. This is nice. Tony let the tears fall and hugged Peter closer. Thank you, Peter. Peter smiled and melted into the hug. You're welcome, Mr. Stark. Tony wasn't an idiot. He knew that something had been off about him his whole life. But thanks to Peter, he finally had a name for it. Autism. Tony Stark is autistic. And you know what? There is nothing wrong with him. Many may try and have tried to explain it away by other factors, but Tony Stark knows better now. He's autistic, and that's okay. Fic 2. The past, the present, the same. Past. Rhodey walked into his dorm and heard a loud bang. With a sigh, he set his stuff down and walked around to find his roommate. His roommate, the infamous Tony Stark. When he saw the 15-year-old with his father on their move-in day, his first feeling was being starstruck. He may not have been the biggest fan of Starks, but anyone would be thrown off when you're standing next to the richest person in the world and his son is your roommate. That feeling of being starstruck quickly changed to annoyance. Who thought that having a 15-year-old go to college was a good idea? The kid was snobby, rude, incredibly egotistical, never looked someone in the eye. He had come back to the kid drunk on more than one occasion. He swore he's never seen that kid sleep, at least not intentionally. He's always surrounded by textbooks, documents, scrap metals, and tools of all sorts. Pony clearly needed some growing up to do, or live in the real world and see how the common folk live. Rhodey tried to be nice, though, more so because his ma would kill him otherwise. As his mother kindly said over the phone one night, rich people are assholes. All he knows is how to be an asshole. Show him not how everyone is like that. If he doesn't take the hint, then fuck it. I'll take care of him myself. Boy, did that turn out to be ironic. Anyway, Rhodey walked into their shared bedroom space and saw Tony on his bed, once again surrounded by papers and books. This time, however, his eyes were closed and he continuously leaned back to bang his head against the wall. Rhodey raised an eyebrow. That must really be hurting. I heard you from our entrance. Tony jumped and jerked his head over to the voice. Seeing his roommate, he sighed and rubbed his eyes. I thought you had class. Just came back. That's another thing he noticed. Tony never knew what time it was, or more accurately, how much time had passed. What you working on? Tony groaned and leaned his head back. Everything. Everything? Tony groaned again and started to ramble. I got homework for design of electromechanical robotic systems and design and manufacturing due this Friday. American history due next Tuesday, which is the same day I have my English project due. I could have gotten that done a couple weeks ago, but Howard needed me to design something for SI. Rhodey grimaced at that. His father does know that college is a lot of work, right?
which I'm behind on, so I really need to get this done first. But of course, I'm stuck, which is fucking perfect, even though I know this equation. I just can't seem to fucking. Tony groaned again and went back to banging his head. Hey, calm down. Hurting yourself is going to get you nowhere. Rhodey walked towards the bed. How about we take a break, yeah? No, you don't understand, Tony yelled out, his voice cracking as he barely reached puberty. All of this work is due very soon, and I'm already late with this design, and I don't want him any more mad at me, so I need to do it now. Rhodey sighed. Tony, you're super worked up and overwhelmed. Take a breather. Tony took a quick and shallow breath, and then glared at Rhodey. Happy? That's not what I meant, and you know it. Well, what if I don't? Tony grumbled, now starting to punch himself in the leg. Okay. How about I help you? I'm in MIT for a reason too. Maybe I could help figure it out. Rhodey waited for a response and eventually got a small nod. Tony sat there hitting his leg, so Rhodey took initiative and moved a couple of the papers over so he had a space to sit on the bed. What are you doing? Pony's sheer volume made Rhodey jump and drop a couple of the papers. He looked over at him with shock and slight annoyance. I thought you wanted me to help you. Yes, but you don't just. Pony pulled on his hair. Those are my papers. Again, you wanted my help. I needed the space to see what you're doing. Rhodey explained with a stern tone. His annoyance was rising. This kid was freaking out over nothing. You don't touch other people's shit. His shouting was getting louder. He stopped pulling on his hair to now hitting his head. His annoyance was now reaching a boiling point. Fine, whatever. I won't touch your shit again. Rhodey sighed and went to grab Tony's hands. Now please stop hitting. Soon as Rhodey's hands touched his, Tony jumped away and screamed, Don't touch me! He broke down into sobs. His punching became harder, and he started rocking. The annoyance Rhodey felt disappeared in an instant, now taken over by concern. First he thought Tony was just having a tantrum, throwing a fit over something small. This looked worse. Way worse. Maybe he was just that overwhelmed. But he's been overwhelmed by work before, and he's never reacted like this. After a few seconds of shock, his brain finally processes that Tony Stark is punching himself, and gets up to grab his pillow. Pony's is closer, but he doesn't want to potentially make things worse. He hands over the pillow to Tony and says, Pones, hit this, please. I don't want you hurting yourself. Pony does hit it a couple of times, pulls it up to his mouth to scream, then puts the pillow against his chest to hug while he continuously rocks and sobs. Rhodey sat there staring at him, feeling helpless. He didn't know what to do, how to help. Part of him wishes his ma was there, but she tended to use a lot of hugs, so maybe not. He sighed and got up to do things that could help him afterwards. He turned off the overhead light, keeping on the lamp that was between their bedside tables to see. Also helped that it was still daytime, so light peeked through the curtains. He got a glass of water and some Tylenol for the headache he was most certainly gonna have. Rhodey came back and set the stuff on the bedside table, carefully sat back on the bed, and waited. After what seemed like half an hour, Tony finally began to calm down. His breathing slowed, the sobbing stopped along with the rocking, and now he looked exhausted. Rhodey grabbed the Tylenol and water, handing them over to Tony. Take that, it should help. It took a minute, but eventually Tony put the pill in his mouth and drank the water. He passed the water back over to Rhodey, maneuvered around so he could grab his blanket and wrap it around his shoulders, hiding his face in the pillow that he was still holding. After he set the glass back down, he watched Tony in silence. He didn't know what to say, what to do. Eventually he asked, What was that? Tony simply shrugged. Rhodey waited for more, but Tony remained silent. He sighed. Look, man, you gotta talk to me. Tony quickly shook his head, looking up to show a pained face. Rhodey frowned. He was all red and blotchy. You could see the tear stains on him. Rhodey took a deep breath and asked, Is that head shaking because you don't want to talk? Tony's head shook again. Or because you can't talk? Rhodey asked slowly. There was a pause, then eventually Tony nodded, tightening his hold on the pillow. Okay, all right, that's fine, Rhodey nodded. Is it okay to touch you now? Instead of nodding or shaking his head, Tony moved over so he was sitting next to and leaning against Rhodey. He wrapped his arms around the kid and rubbed up and down his back. They sat like that for another 10 or so minutes. Tony glanced up at Rhodey and whispered, Thank you. He gave him a small smile. Rhodey squeezed his shoulders, smiling back. Of course. The present. It was rare for Tony to ask him to come over. It was more the case that Rhodey would call a couple days ahead of time to let him know he was arriving. The first time, though, he just surprised him, but he could tell Tony felt off the rest of the visit. But Tony called, said he had something to tell him, and hung up. Well, that didn't make him panic at all, and when he tried to call back, it all went to voicemail. Although he supposes he did receive a text 2 hours later saying, It's a good thing, I promise. One of these days, Rhodey's gonna kill him, swear to God. He arrived at the tower and headed straight down to the lab, knowing that's where he would be. And sure enough, there he was, tinkering away at some tech. Rhodey walked over and knocked on the table. Tony jumped a little and turned. Seeing Rhodey made him smile. Honey Bear, you're here. Rhodey chuckled and sat down in the chair next to Tony. You say that like you didn't specifically ask for me to be here. And next time, let me know if what you're telling me is good news or bad news immediately. I've had too many close calls with you. Yeah, sorry about that. He ran his hands through his hair. I didn't realize how it sounded until I told Pepper about it later, and she told me to clarify it. Huh, that's interesting. So Pepper already knows? Knows? Oh yeah, she knows. Rhodey hummed and watched Tony tinker some more. So, are you going to tell me? Hmm? Oh, yeah, I am. Tony took a deep breath. So you know the kid? Rhodey raised an eyebrow. Your intern? Peter. Yeah, Peter. Tony set his stuff down and took another deep breath. So a couple of weeks ago, he came into the lab and told me that he's autistic. Rhodey's eyes widened, but he didn't say anything. And because I knew jack shit about it, he asked me to research. Let me guess, you spend the rest of the night researching and found out some shit? Rhodey asked. Tony looked down and nodded. It all makes sense. I've never understood myself more than I did that night. It explained, it explained everything. The movements I do, it's called stimming, and the reason I'm so into engineering is because they are my special interests, and I get super hyper-focused on topics, which makes me forget to eat, drink, and sleep. I have sensory issues, which is why I like to wear sunglasses, and the meltdowns. At that, Rhodey leaned back, thinking back on his own. So that day in college, he interrupted. Tony stopped and looked over at Rhodey as he said, The first time you had one of your outbursts in front of me, that was a meltdown. Tony bit his lip and nodded. I was overwhelmed with work, overwhelmed in general, and you moved my stuff, which to me and my already chaotic mind made it even more chaotic. Plus, you touched me afterward, which, big no-no. Yeah, I've learnt that. Rhodey smiled. He reached out and patted his shoulder, giving it a squeeze. I'm happy you found this out, man. Tony smiled. Yeah, me too. It's taking me some time getting used to it, like what it all means and everything. But I'm just glad I finally have something that explains me. Rhodey nodded, leaning back against the chair. That's understandable. You planning on getting diagnosed? Tony nodded. Yeah, Pep and I are looking for a specialist. What about after? After what? You get diagnosed. You're officially autistic. Is that going to stay a secret, or do you plan on telling the world? Tony let out a shaky breath. Honestly, I don't know. I don't want to think about that right now. Rhodey nodded. I get it. But remember, Tony, you're a very public figure. So even if you could try to keep it private, someone could. I said I don't want to think about it right now, Tony sternly interrupted, taking deep breaths not to let the panic rise. I'm sorry. Rhodey apologized and stood up, opening his arms for a hug. Tony got up and hugged him, nestling in his neck. The two of them casually swayed side to side, both now knowing this was a stim. Rhodey held him tight and rubbed his back. No matter what you do or what happens, I'll be here, okay? I love you, Tones. Love you too, Rhodes. The two stayed hugging and swaying like that for a few more minutes. Eventually, Tony broke up the hug and started rambling about the current project he was working on. Rhodey couldn't help but smile. He looked happier. He showed his happiness more. He had a feeling this new discovery within Tony would make things a lot better. The same. If he was being honest, Rhodey had a moment of thinking that Tony would be completely different. He started having this thought after Tony explained what masking was, hiding your autistic traits. Tony's been doing that for years. How much of him was him, and how much of him is made up? He didn't have to worry much, though. Turns out Tony's true self was part of Tony he used to rarely see. The two decided on a whim to build a robot, a small one, like the ones they used to make their first year in robotics class. It took them 3 days to build their little friend, which they decided to name Little Friend. They were laughing and having fun the whole time. It was like they were back to their first year of college, second semester, robotic class partners. The moment of truth. The moment of truth. Time to turn on their robot, little friend. See if he works. Time to turn on their robot, dummy. See if he works. Tony walks over to the robot, flips a switch. Tony walks over to the robot, flips a switch. It works. Little friend starts beeping, moving around on the lab table, picking up objects and bringing them over to Rhodey. Dummy starts beeping, moving around the lab room, picking up objects and bringing them to Rhodey. Tony squeals. He jumps up and down, clapping his hands. Pure joy. Rhodey smiles at Tony, finding this side of him incredibly endearing. Rhodey smiles at Tony, incredibly happy to see this side of him. In that moment, he realized this. This is who his best friend is. His masking tried to hide this. Quite frankly, he's happy Tony discovered this part of himself, his true self, because this right here is him, his genius friend who gets robots. He looked back at Rhodey, a smile still on his face, yet he tilts his head. What's that look for? Rhodey patted him on the back. I'm just happy you found yourself, Tones. Tony chuckled and nodded, wrapping an arm around his shoulder. Yeah, me too.
Bit 3. The world will know. This might be unprofessional to say, Mr. Stark, but I am rather surprised you didn't get diagnosed earlier. Tony let out a small chuckle. Today was the final assessment. He answered every vague-ass question from the psychologist, Dr. Elizabeth Lon, had for him. He dug up all the school reports he could find, told stories about things his dear old dad didn't like, and threw in a couple newspaper articles showing off his public meltdowns for good measure. All of it led to Dr. Lon coming to the same conclusion Tony did only a little over a month ago. He is autistic. Yes, well, I told you why that wasn't the case. Oh no, I understand that. Dr. Lon looked up at him. Times were different. We didn't have the knowledge we have now. I think even with that knowledge, it still would have gone nowhere, Tony mumbled, crossing his arms and bouncing his leg. Maybe so, but we can't change the past, Mr. Stark. Dr. Lon softly smiled at him. We can only focus on the now, and right now you are officially diagnosed autistic. Tony let out a small smile. So what do you plan to do with this information? Tony looked up at her, slightly tilting his head. What do you mean? I hate to bring this up, but you are a very public figure, she said. So you do have to think about how you will go about this. You can make it public and have everyone know, but you are also fully entitled to your privacy. If you don't want anyone else to know about this, then it'll all stay safe and a secret. Tony let out a shaky breath. Of course, the public. This was one of the many, many times he hated being famous. Of course, there were days when he loves it. Him having that status and money is how he was even able to get Dr. Lon, and able to get her quick. He's lucky in so many ways, but he hates the fact that he can't have moments like this. He can't just go to a psychologist. Hell, he can't even go to the grocery store without the whole world knowing. He knows he's privileged, more now than ever thanks to Peter. These moments make him hate it. I know that's a scary thought, Dr. Lon said, sensing his spiral. But as I said in my first session with you, we are in a secure building in a mostly remote part of New York, and anything said in here stays in here, unless you say otherwise. He saw him nod and continued. Of course, you do have a bit more to think about than the just, do I tell my family or not? You have the public eye, but the world isn't entitled to know everything about you. Only you can decide that. She looked at him and said, It's all your choice. So what do you want to do? I don't know, Pep. Tony got back to the tower and told Pepper everything, the now official diagnosis, the conversation that followed after. Currently, Tony was pacing around the living room, freaking out over the choice. I'm tired of hiding who I am, yet I don't want everyone to know what's wrong with me. Pepper looked up at him. Tony, there's nothing wrong. Yes, there is. You know there is. I'm fucked up and everyone will. Tony. I'm sorry. He stopped his pacing, not wanting to look her in the eyes. His foot tapped rapidly, breaths a little shallow. I don't know. Hey, it's okay. Pepper walked over and put her hands on his shoulders. He ran them down his arm and linked his hands with his, softly rubbing his knuckles. You don't have to know right now. You don't have to decide right now. Pony, you just got diagnosed an hour ago. Allow yourself time to process all this. Then we can worry about the public. Yeah. He took a deep breath, his foot tapping slowly down. Yeah, you're right. She smirked. I always am. Pony chuckled and started stimming with her hands, rubbing and moving her fingers with his, twirling them in little circles, occasionally giving her hands a squeeze. Over the past month, he's been noticing what he does as stims, and a lot of it revolves around his hands and the need for them to do something. They always had to be moving, and to be moving not just his, but Pepper's. This was one of his favourite stims. He always feels so calm, so loved. Being allowed so openly to stim, and for her to participate in it, means more to him than Pepper could ever understand. Pepper softly smiled and leaned forward to kiss him. She let one hand go and moved it up to play with his hair. No matter what you choose, no matter what happens, I will be here by your side. Pony nodded, looking down but smiling wide. Yeah, I know. Thank you, Pep. Anything to make you happy. The two fully embraced, swaying side to side, both feeling the contentment and love from one another. No other worries about work or the press. It was only them in the world. They were walking down the street they always take home, walking past the same building they see every day, when from across the road they saw a guy walk out of the psychologist building. They normally wouldn't bat an eye. They've seen guys and girls in fancy-looking business suits come in and out of there. This one made them do a double take. No, it can't be. But it is. Everyone would recognize him from a mile away. But why was he here? Why was Tony Stark walking out of the psychologist's office? They had to know. They pulled out their phone. Snap. 2 weeks have passed since his diagnosis. After Pepper, he told Rhodey, Peter, and Happy, but so far no one else. Not that he hasn't thought about it. More like he can't stop thinking about it. For now, though, he'd rather keep it to his close family and friends. He might tell the team, but he doesn't know how everyone would respond. Bruce would be okay with it. Clint could go either way. He has no idea how Natasha would respond, and Steve. One thing he knows for sure that he doesn't plan on telling the public. That would cause way too much chaos and probably destroy his reputation. No one would trust him to run his business, or hell, be Iron Man. So he's gone quiet. Right now, He was enjoying his lab time with Peter. The two were working out and testing a couple new web shooting designs. They cleared out a section of the lab so that Peter has a wall he can shoot his webs at. All right, shoot now. Peter pressed the button and 3 webs shot out. He stumbled back because of the sheer force and weight of the 3 webs shooting out all at once. The first 2 ended up looking great. The last one was smaller in size and ended up lower on the wall, some even spilling onto the floor. Peter groaned, looking up to the ceiling and stomping his feet. Fail again. It's not a fail, kid. Last attempt was only 1 worked, and they were all small in size. This is a massive improvement. Tony walked over and ruffled his hair. Peter pouted and leaned into him. I know, it's just frustrating. We've been working on this for weeks. These things take time, you know that. Tony looked down at him and sighed, rubbing his back. I know it's frustrating, but we'll figure it out. We're smart, all right? This time Peter sighed. Yeah, I think I want to do something else now. My brain is fried, and if I do any more work, I might just cry. Well, we don't want that. How about a movie? Peter's pout immediately turned into a smile, and he jumped up and down. Ooh, yes, can we watch The Lion King? It's been forever since I've watched that movie. Didn't we watch it a few months ago? When Ned and I had our Disney playlist on shuffle the other day and Hakuna Matata came on, and it reminded me of the movie and I want to watch it again. Tony smirked, crossing his arms. Doesn't that movie make you want to cry, though? I thought you said you didn't want to cry. Well, technically, you said you didn't want to see me cry. Peter saw Tony roll his eyes with a fond smile, which only made Peter's smile grow. And even then, it's a good cry. Planned cry. A controlled, planned cry is good. Oh, so we're writing down schedules for our cries now. Tony chuckled and started heading upstairs to the living room. Then I actually got to dip out at 5:38, because that's when my scheduled cry is next. Peter giggled, flapping his hands. Mr. Stark, it's 5:51 now. Oh, damn it, kid, I missed my crying session. Got to add another year of emotional repression because of you. Peter was now full on laughing, and Tony joined in, and soon after that he joined in on the hand-flapping Stim. He was slowly allowing himself to stim more openly more and more. Sure, he was always stimming in some way. Oftentimes it was subtle. This wasn't to him. But through the kids' help and gentle encouragement, he's been allowing himself to stim larger, at least in front of the people he told, which is still a massive step. They were almost at the top when Friday spoke through the elevator. Boss, there is an incoming call from Dr. Elizabeth Vaughn. Tony furrowed his brows, curious to what it might be about. The doors opened and Tony looked at Peter. Go set up the TV and everything while I take this call, all right? Okay, Mr. Stark. The two walked out together, yet went their separate ways. Before they were fully apart, Peter asked, Is everything okay? Why would she be calling? I don't know. Things should be fine. Now Tony's heart started thumping. Peter left the room, and Tony took a big, deep breath before picking up the phone. Tony Stark speaking? Hello, Mr. Stark. There was a definite shakiness in her voice, which immediately made Tony even more anxious. I have some rather unfortunate news. Uh-huh. Tony gripped the phone tightly. What is it? There was a shaky breath through the phone. Our place has been hacked. Tony's stomach immediately dropped. We have called the authorities to find out who did it. All we know so far is that they've leaked many of our patients' documents. We don't know how many yet. Yours was one of them. His heart started racing. I am so sorry, Mr. Stark. We are planning on upgrading our security as soon as things get sorted out. It's okay. It's... Shit happens. Didn't plan on it. Tony let out a shaky breath. I can give you my security systems better. It's better. You don't have to do that, Mr. Stark. I understand if you have lost trust in us. Tony shook his head, then remembered it was a phone call, so he had to speak. Why was it so hard to speak? No, it's fine. Thank you for letting me know. Of course, we've been making these calls all day and we'll be continuing to make them. I hope the rest of your day goes better. Mm-hmm. Goodbye, Mr. Stark. Bye. Phone hung up and Tony immediately dropped to the ground. He checked his emails first and saw one from Pepper in the PR department, the latter having a link to an article. His hands shook as he opened up the article. Tony Stark actually has autism? These photos may prove so. Tony Stark has been called many things throughout his now 46 years of life. But is it time to add autism to the list? Photos were sent through an anonymous tipper, the first of which is the infamous celebrity walking out of Inner Insight Psychology Clinic. What would Tony be doing there? The next 5 are documents that supposedly show Tony's log while being tested there, the final showing that he was officially approved of having autism. What does this mean for Tony? How could having autism now affect how he runs Stark Industries? How does that affect his standing as Iron Man? Will Tony Stark tell the truth about his diagnosis? Autism is a neurological disorder. He stopped reading the article. Well, more like he was shaking so hard he dropped it right out of his hand. He curled into a ball as his breathing got quicker and quicker. They're gonna know. They know. The whole world knows. Everyone now knows of the fuck-up that was Tony Stark. His father was right. He was a mistake, a waste of space, a pathetic excuse for a human. No true son of mine would ever behave like you do. Everything he created was going to go to waste. No one trusts him anymore. He can hardly trust himself. Can anyone trust him to do such a job? Maybe he should try to curl up more to the point of him sinking into a black hole of nothing. Something was put around him, something soft, a bit of weight to it. He grabbed onto the edge and softly rubbed it. Slowly looked up and opened his eyes. When did he close them? And saw someone in front of him. He flinched. The person backed up a little. The person looked like they were taking deep breaths. Maybe he should do that. He tried, gasped, and failed. He could never calm down at this rate. He was going to hyperventilate himself into dying. He let out an agonizing yell and banged his head against the wall. He saw the person get up. Of course, they always leave, and it's always his fault. The person was back, with a pillow. The person put the pillow behind him so he wouldn't hurt himself from hitting his head. Of course, what an idiot, hurting myself over. The person went back to breathing and talking. The person was counting, slow, easy. Pony once again tried to follow along, grabbing the pillow from his head and squeezing it against his chest, finding it a little bit easier to breathe. Pony continued to take deep breaths, his mind slowly becoming clearer and clearer. He became aware of his surroundings, now recognizing the person in front of him. But Peter? Peter had a small smile on his face. Hey, Mrs. Stark, how are you feeling? Pony let out a small, breathless chuckle. Not good. Peter chuckled too. Yeah, I assumed. I'm sorry, kid. No, it's okay. What happened? Was the call bad? Yeah, I guess you could say that. Tony shakily sighed. Inner Insight, the place I got my diagnosis. They got hacked. Oh no, Peter exclaimed. After a few moments he thought about what that meant. He'd sunk further into the ground. Oh no. Tony gulped, taking shaky deep breaths. Your diagnosis, the files, did they... He couldn't finish. They both knew what was left unsaid. Further confirmed by Tony nodding his head. Peter gasped. Tony curled in on himself and hid his face in the pillow. Can I hug you, Mr. Stark? He saw a small nod come from his mentor. Peter immediately moved himself over so he could fully embrace him. A few minutes later the two heard someone running in. Pony? Pony! Pepper entered the hallway and crouched down in front of them. I tried to come down sooner, but I had to talk with PR. Pony looked up with tears in his eyes. Pepper moved and sat on the other side of him, embracing him as well. Pony curled in and melted into the embrace of two people he loved more than anyone. It was the next morning. Pepper decided to have everyone rest the night and figure out a plan in the morning. Peter messaged Aunt May. She agreed to allow him to stay the night and to skip school. Pepper was sitting in the chair on her laptop, emailing the PR department, while Tony and Peter were cuddled on the couch. Pony had the weighted blanket wrapped around him, and the two were stimming with their respective Stim toys, a red and blue tangle for Peter, and an all-black fidget cube for Tony. Well, good news. The original article got taken down and the authorities are tracking down the hacker. Peter bit his lip. Bad news? Pepper sighed. It's already made the greater news. Multiple other articles have been posted. A couple news stations have covered it. It's trending online. Pony groaned and started punching his leg, and Peter quickly handed over a pillow to punch on instead. He asked, "So, what can Mr. Stark do?" Pepper closed her laptop. One of two things. One, we find the guy who hacked and leaked the files, pay them money to keep quiet, and hope this gets swept under the rug. Pony sighed, dwelling in on himself, already knowing what option 2 is. Or 2, he gives a press conference confirming everything. No. Pepper looked sympathetic at him. Tony, you can't only say no because you're scared. I said no, Tony stated, now looking up from the pillow, a sense of desperation in his voice. I can't have people know something's wrong with me, that I'm not capable enough to do my job. Pepper looked at him with fear, but before she said anything, they heard a small, firm voice say, "So you think something's wrong with you? With us? Think that we're not capable of doing our jobs?" Pony's heart rate picked up, and he looked at Peter. Kid was glaring at his tangle fidget, holding back tears in his eyes. Fuck. Peter, I didn't mean... I know, but you still believe it. Not with you. Never with you. But there's still the belief that being autistic is wrong and bad. I don't believe that in general, Pete. He noticed that Peter had started rocking. I don't. I know that being autistic isn't wrong, and that plenty of autistic people are very capable of doing great things. Pony put his hand on Peter's shoulder. You do so many amazing things, and I'm so proud of you. Peter took a couple deep breaths and said, "But you still believe that within yourself." Pony sighed, letting go of Peter. I try. I have moments where I feel okay. Well, even sometimes proud. It's hard to break over 40 years of everybody telling you different. Peter was silent and Tony allowed him. He looked away and went back to fidgeting with the cube, focusing on his breath so he doesn't spiral into a self-destructive mess. Few minutes passed with only the sounds of Pepper's laptop clicking, and she went back to writing emails. Pensions were still a little high. I think you should make it public. The two adults look over at the kid with a bit of shock. Pony started to say, Peter, when he got interrupted. I know you're scared. I get it. I would be too. I know I got upset with what you said, but I have moments like that too. I still do sometimes. I just think, I wonder how many people struggle with those same thoughts, those feelings of being alone in the world, of being a freak. Peter's eyes welled with tears. That if we had someone to look up to, someone who understands our struggles, who struggled themselves too, it would reassure people, maybe even save so many people. Peter looked up at Tony. There's going to be people who don't like it. Say you're a fake, say ableist things to you, all that. People suck, and it sucks. But the best thing you can do is keep doing what you're doing and try not to let it get you down. People flat out told me that I wouldn't survive a year at Midtown. And yeah, I have my moments of struggle, but I'm still going there. Things got a bit tougher once Spider-Man came into the mix, but I'm managing that too, and now I'm happier than I've ever been. Peter reached out, grabbing Tony's hand and giving it a squeeze. Again, I know it's scary, and if I'm totally wrong about this, you can tell me to shut up now, but I think you should make it public. Pony softly smiled, stimming with Peter's hands. He shook his head. No, I don't think it's wrong. I agree with you. When did you get so wise, kid? Peter shrugged. Through experience, I guess. Pepper once again set her laptop aside. Shall I set up a press conference for tonight? Pony looked over at Peter, who was smiling at him, a small nod of encouragement. Pony nodded himself and said, Yes, let's do it. Pony paced beside the door that would lead him to the press. Journalists, cameramen, reporters, everyone from the NYC News is here. Pony has never loved press conferences, even if we ignore all the sensory issues. Having to act professional in front of an annoying crowd of annoying people really irked him. Why must he censor himself? Public already knows how he is. Why does he have to act like a boring businessman? He's never loved press conferences, and this is probably the most nervous one has ever made him feel. He has no clue how anyone would respond, what the general reaction would be. Positive? Negative? Who knows? And that terrified him. Hey, Mr. Stark! Kid, what are you doing here? Pony saw Peter run in, and the two had a quick hug, which has become more common since that fateful day in the lab. I wanted to say hi, Peter said with a bright smile. He then started rocking a little. I also wanted to check in on you. Pony smiled softly. You didn't have to, kid. I didn't say I had to. I said I wanted to. Right, you're right, Tony chuckled, then sighed. I'm very nervous. Yeah, I can see why you would be. Peter rubbed his hands together and then looked up at him. You're gonna do great, though. Pony smiled, pulling him in close to ruffle his hair. Pepper came through the door. Pony, honey, you're on. Pony gave Peter one final hug. He grabbed Pepper's hand and gave it a tight squeeze. He took a deep breath, put on his sunglasses, then walked out. Cameras flashing, people shouting, all the comeuppance that comes with the press. This is why Tony wears sunglasses to these things, and has learned ways to shut them up. He walks up to the podium, waves of people coming forward, overlapping yells and flashing lights. Pony raises his arms, closing his fists. A hush of silence falls through the room, and Tony speaks. We all know why we're here, skipping the pleasantries because that's not needed right now. We all know why we are gathered here today. At least I certainly know. You want to hear the big news? Is Tony Stark autistic? Tony pointed at a young journalist in front of him. Bet that makes a great headline, doesn't it, bud? The guy stammered and Tony waved his hand. You don't got to answer that. We already know it does. That is the reason why we are all here. We all saw that amazing grabber of a headline and rushed to hear it from the man himself. Pony glanced down at the podium, then looked up with a smirk. But first, a story. Groans from the audience. Look, guys, if you want the answer, you gotta stick around, he said with a shrug. He glanced around and saw no one moving, so he continued on. This story is of a kid, a young boy born into a family of wealth and power, the only son of a couple who expected the perfect child, and for most part he was. He was quiet, didn't play with toys, a prodigy, everything they could have dreamed for. Except, this child had some quirks. They noticed the boy, even now at 4 years old, didn't say more than 10 words. They noticed how much of a hassle it was to put the kid into some damn clothes. They noticed how the boy was always moving his hands in weird ways. They noticed, especially when this kid was in front of a camera, how he would cry and scream, yelling about how much the lights and voices hurt. Pony paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. His parents sent him to boarding school. Partly that's because that's where all the genius rich kids go, but also so this kid could learn. Really, he needed to learn some discipline. Well, kinda, yeah, but that's besides the point. He cleared his throat. Anyway, kid did not have an easy time at school. Sure, the classes were easy, way too easy, but the poor guy just couldn't make any friends. Now you may think because he's a 7-year-old in a class full of 10-year-olds, which, partially yes, but no matter what he did, he always felt left out.
Which, okay, so sad. Boo-hoo, the little rich private kid doesn't have any friends at a private boarding school. I know how it sounds. This kid, though, because of what he went through growing up, he always knew he was different. The boy was incredibly aware. He saw how everyone was treated compared to him. He saw how he was different against his peers. He just didn't know why. There had to be a why. There had to be a reason, or else he was just a mistake and a burden. Pony paused, taking a deep breath. We skip ahead, yada yada yada. The kid is a genius. He gets into trouble a lot, makes some risky decisions during his young adult years that he will come to regret later in life. He grows up hiding the parts of himself that his peers didn't like. He tries to move less, hold back the breakdowns over silly things like the lights. He tries his damn hardest to learn all the stupid social rules that still don't make any sense. Pony took a deep breath. The boy is now a man. He's in his 40s, mostly accepted the fact that these quirks he's had since his childhood would never go away, but will forever be different. That is, until he had a conversation with someone, an autistic person. He saw about half the room perk up. The two have a chat. They'll talk about autism, and later on, the man does some additional research of his own. I'm sure you've all picked up by now that the kid is me, the man is me. I was talking about my life. And well, after talking to the autistic person, doing research of my own, and seeing a psychologist, the moment of truth. He took a deep breath. I am autistic. The crowd erupted, people shouting questions, demanding answers and explanations. Pony once again shot his fist into the air, and the crowd silenced. There were a few seconds where Tony didn't say anything, but then he began again. When I found out the documents had been leaked, I had a full-on meltdown. I'm a very public figure. Maybe I should have expected it, but to be honest, I wasn't ready to accept it. When you get told all your life that the things that make you different also make you wrong, it's hard to break that habit of negative self-talk. There are days where I hate being autistic, wishing I could have just been normal, but most of the time now, I am proud to be autistic. The moments where I'm with the people I love and can just be 100% authentically myself, those are the moments I am most proud. When I was a kid, autism wasn't really known, wasn't talked about. Those kids were chucked in the loony bin. I am so glad times have changed, that stuff like this is talked about and treated seriously, that autistic individuals can now thrive. I know there are some undiagnosed autistics out there reading this, watching this, wherever people consume media nowadays. But I just want you to know I see you, I hear you, I was you. For 46 years of my life, I went undiagnosed, only finding out almost 2 months ago that this was a possibility, and getting confirmation 2 weeks ago. You are not broken, you are not a burden, not a mistake, a freak, none of that. You are just autistic, and that's okay. Autism can be hard. This world was not built with neurodivergent people in mind. Trust me when I say being authentically you is the most freeing thing in the world. And if you aren't in a safe enough space to do that, I get it. I was there too. You'll get out. One day you'll be out and free, and you can find the people who love you for you, not some mask you put up. From one autistic guy to another, the unmasked, real you is great. You are great, and we got this. No further questions. Pony headed off stage, leaving the screaming crowd behind him. He entered the waiting area and was immediately pulled into a hug from Pepper and Peter. Pony's arm wrapped around Pepper's shoulders, the other clasping the back of Peter's hair. The three were swaying side to side. Peter smiled wide. I'm proud of you, Mr. Stark. So proud. Pepper kissed him on the lips. I couldn't be more proud of you. Pony hummed and melted into the embrace, the press conference wearing him out. Of course, now there's the worry of the wider public. How will this affect his business, Iron Man? But none of that matters right now. Right now, Tony is with the people he loves, being 100% authentically himself, and he couldn't be happier than that. I'm sure you've all picked up by now that the kid is me, the man is me. I was talking about my life. And well, after talking to the autistic person, doing research of my own, and seeing a psychologist,
I am autistic. Steve watched from his TV, his eyebrows furrowed. Autism? Now what could that be?
Work 4. Proud of the struggles. I'm sure you've all picked up by now that the kid is me, the man is me. I was talking about my life. And, well, after talking to the autistic person, doing research of my own, and seeing a psychologist, I am autistic. Steve watched from his TV, his eyebrows furrowed. Autism? Now what could that be? He turned off the TV to think. The world had changed immensely since he came out of the ice. So many new things Steve had to get a grasp on. Technology was one of the toughest ones. Even years after waking up, he still doesn't feel like he 100% understands it. The collective mind has changed too. He was more open-minded than most back then, but it shocked him the first time he saw a black man go into a restaurant with his white girlfriend. One thing he didn't expect were all of the new words he had to learn, modern-day lingo. Some of it were random references to movies or TV shows he hadn't seen, which a good chunk had been resolved by now. There were many new scientific discoveries since the 40s. He read up on some of the more simple stuff, like new vaccines and of course the internet, but left the complicated stuff to people more qualified, aka smarter, than him. But there were many new words, terms, labels he didn't know either. Of course, some of them existed when he was growing up. He knew some gay people. He heard stories of fellas dressing like chicks. But the LGBTQ+ community and all that it means, what it meant to have pride in something that, for Steve, didn't feel like that long ago, was illegal. He had no clue how or why. Which brings him back to Tony. Tony confused him, to say the least. Steve thought he'd be a lot like Howard, a brilliant and charming man, one who helped him become him. And yeah, Tony was like that too. He had a lot of charm and was certainly a genius, wearing it like a badge of honour, but he also had these quirks. Quirks that irked Steve more than he could ever imagine. He was always moving, having to constantly remind him to stop tapping a pen or spinning his glasses at debriefings. The lack of eye contact always bothered Steve, always taking it as a sign of disrespect. Back when they lived with each other, it seemed like they always had to keep watch of their landlord. He would go days, sometimes even weeks without leaving the lab, only occasionally seeing himself to get coffee. His lack of self-preservation, never taking himself or others seriously, and his massive ego, which, according to the press conference, according to Tony himself, is due to a thing called autism, something he has never heard of before. From how he described it, it sounded miserable. It was a condition that made him cry, that made him very lonely. It seemed like a struggle, poor Howard trying to get Tony to wear clothes only for him to scream. Does autism cause pain? He did mention seeing a psychologist, so it is a mental condition of some type. Steve thought back on all these quirks, all of these things Tony described in his press conference to be part of his condition, all of the arguments they have, the fights, from the almost daily, look at me in the eye when I speak to you, even to their battle in Siberia, how he couldn't get Tony to listen. As soon as the emotions hit, he went on the attack. All of this was due to his autism, and he has announced it to the world like someone would announce them having cancer. It was a very brave thing to do. It was only a few months of the Avengers being broken up before the UN and the government realised that they can't have half of Earth's mightiest heroes in jail, so they revised the accords that both sides were willing to compromise on. The rogue Avengers were pardoned, and before they could all go out saving the world, they now had weekly meetings going over each section of the accords so that they would all understand the agreement. This was their first meeting after the press conference, and if things weren't tense before, they certainly were now. They all sat in their usual spots. Steve's seat was at the head of the table so he could see all of his teammates, except for Tony, who always sits in the chair behind him. When Steve walked in, he was already in there, lowering his eyes to look at his hands. He had some colourful, square-shaped toy he was playing with. Tony just seemed to notice Steve was there. He gave his usual greeting of a single nod and looked back over at the wall just behind Steve, over his shoulder, like he usually did. Steve furrowed his brow, then pointed at the toy and asked, What you got there? Tony bit his cheek and looked down at the toy. It's a poppet, Fidget. My intern got it for me. Steve furrowed his brows even more. Wasn't finding his condition supposed to help him stop these behaviours? He did only just find out, though, going through a learning curve. Steve nodded, then said, "Make sure it doesn't cause a disturbance." Tony scoffed a little, eyes now fully focused on the poppet. "I'll make sure of it, Cap." Steve wanted to say more, but at that point Ross came in to start the meeting. He sighed and went back to his seat. Throughout the meeting, Steve kept glancing back at Tony. He always did this, wanting to make sure Tony was paying attention to what Ross was saying. But now there was a sense of curiosity, seeing how Tony would be in these meetings now that he knows of his condition. He thought that he would change by sitting properly in the chair, not moving around so much, making eye contact when someone was talking. Come to find out, he did none of that. Every time he looked back, Tony was seated in a new and weird position. The poppet he brought was being put to good use, being constantly played with. At least this toy was quiet, unlike Tony's previously well-used pen tapping. And with the eye contact, half the time he was looking anywhere other than Ross, and if he was looking towards him, Steve could tell it wasn't direct eye contact. He started to grow a little frustrated. He thought that by discovering and announcing his condition to the world, it was going to draw an end to these behaviours, yet here he still was actively doing them. Steve had to keep reminding himself that this was all new to Tony. He thought back to when he was sick, before the serum. With every new sickness came another bone-crushing, sometimes quite literally, reminder that he was not going to get better. After the serum, even though he was almost immediately thrusted into being a soldier, being Captain America, it took him some time getting used to not being ill. He had to remind himself how to breathe sometimes, not being used to being able to take larger, deep breaths with his previous reduced lung capacity. One thing that helped then was having support, knowing someone was there to help him through the difficult times, who never gave up on him even when they didn't know if he'd survive. His ma, Peggy, Bucky. So maybe he just had to be that for Tony. After a few hours, the meeting was over. The rest of the Avengers were leaving with whispered small talks, Tony trying to rush himself out as usual. This time, however, Steve walked beside him. When Tony turned to look in his direction, he flinched back, not expecting to see him. Steve took a step back, then asked, "Mind if we talk for a couple minutes?" Tony squinted and stood there in silence for a few seconds, seemingly pondering at the situation in front of him. Eventually, though, he nodded and said, "Okay." Steve smiled at him. "I want to start out by saying I watched your press conference." He watched as Tony visibly stilled. "I wanted to tell you how brave you are." Tony's face immediately turned to confusion. "Huh?" "Yes, brave," Steve smiled wider. "Coming out and telling the world about a condition like that must be challenging." "Where exactly are you going with this?" Tony looked up at him and moved one of his hands up to his chest, tapping it in circles much like he did when he had the arc reactor. "Because I'm not really liking where this is heading." Steve took a deep breath, keeping his frustrations down. "What I'm getting at is that I want to support you." Tony stopped his movements. "Support me?" "Yes, Tony, support you." "Support me with what, exactly?" "With your condition, helping you try to fix it." Tony glared at Steve, taking very slow and calculated breaths. "Fixing it, huh?" Steve looked up and raised his hands in bewilderment. "Yes, Tony, what are you not understanding?" "No, I don't think you understand," Tony interrupted, taking a step closer between them. "I don't need fixing, Cap. There is nothing to fix." No, I do understand. I may not have had your condition." "Would you quit calling it a condition?" "Would you quit interrupting me?" Steve spoke. Tony flinched and looked down, going back to playing with the poppet. Steve sighed, this time not bothering to tell him to look up, and continued. "I may not have had autism, but I did have a lot of illnesses growing up, and there were many times where I almost gave up hope of finding a cure." Tony stilled a little, eyes widening. Steve kept going. "Most people felt like there was no use in me even trying to get better, that I should just stay in my house and die." He swallowed the lump in his throat. But because of my ma and Bucky, I kept going. I kept fighting. And after the serum, Peggy was there to help me get used to my new normal. Tony, I want to help you get used to your new normal and to get better. Tony stood there in silence, the only sounds being the rapid tapping of his foot. He then shook his head and said, "Nope, I'm out." Steve rolled his eyes as he saw Tony rushing towards the door. He followed quickly behind, reaching out to grab him. "Stark, it's incredibly rude to walk out on—" He got a hold of his wrist. Tony gasped and flinched. Pulling his arm away, he growled at Steve. "Don't you fucking touch me." He was now borderline running to the door. Steve shouted at him, "I am trying to have a meaningful conversation with you." "Good luck next time, Rogers." He slammed the door. Steve stood there, rubbing his face and groaning. He stumbled back over to the chair and sat down with a sigh. "Well, that went well." No, it did not. He jumped and looked over to the source of the voice. On the other side of the room, hidden in the corner, was Natasha. He put his hand on his heart and said, "Christ, Nat, I didn't know you were back there." Natasha came out of the corner and walked over towards Steve. "I heard you saying you wanted to talk to Stark, so I stayed to make sure nobody said anything stupid and didn't get hurt, considering the last time the two of you were alone." Steve winced at the reminder. "And?" "Well, nobody got hurt." She grabbed a chair and moved it to sit in front of Steve. "But I believe some stupid stuff was said." Steve huffed. "Yup, kind of figured that." He looked up at Natasha. "So what was it?" "Did you watch the press conference?" Steve squinted his eyes. "Yes, I literally said that to Tony." "No," Natasha said. "I mean the whole thing. Did you see him finish the speech and walk off that stage?" Steve thought back to that night, playing it through in his head. He remembered Tony saying, "I am autistic." Then he turned off the TV to think. He was still on the stage when he said that. He bit his lip and shook his head. "I turned it off after he confirmed his condition." Natasha nodded like she expected to hear that answer, quickly pulled out her phone, which had the video on screen. "Watch it again, and finish it this time." Steve rolled his eyes with a smirk and pressed play. He briefly listened to the same dialogue he watched before, Tony talking about his childhood, the same lonely and sad story of a kid who found pain in existing. He glanced up at Natasha sometimes, being met with a blank expression. He then got to the part he stopped at. "And, well, after talking to the autistic person, doing research of my own, and seeing a psychologist, I am autistic." He watched as the crowd shouted, demanding both questions and answers, but then he saw Tony silence the crowd and continued. Steve listened as he explained about the document leaks, how he had had a meltdown and wished he could just be normal. "There are days where I hate being autistic, wishing I could have just been normal, but most of the time now, I am proud to be autistic." Steve's eyes widened in shock, looking up at another expressionless Natasha. Proud? He was proud to have this. Why would he be proud to have a condition that has caused this much suffering in his life? "You are not broken, you are not a burden, not a mistake, a freak, none of that. You are just autistic, and that's okay." Autism can be hard. This world was not built with neurodivergent people in mind, but trust me when I say being authentically you is the most freeing thing in the world. One day you'll be out and free, and you can find the people who love you for you, not some mask you put up. The unmasked, real you is great. You are great, and we've got this. The video stopped and Steve silently handed Natasha back her phone. They sat there quietly pondering for a while. Then Steve said, "I don't understand. How could he be proud of this?" "I don't understand either," Natasha said quietly. Steve looked up at her sympathetically. Not understanding something was one of the few things Natasha was afraid of. In the Red Room, if anyone behaved like Stark was describing himself, they were deemed defective and killed on the spot. There was no room for error. But he is proud of it. He doesn't want to get rid of it. He said that he was miserable before he knew, when he had to hide his behaviours, and now that he doesn't have to hide, he's happier. No, I don't understand, and maybe I never will, but I want to understand him. She looked up at Steve. We hurt him a lot. We have a chance to work with him again, and I don't want to mess that up. Steve nodded. Me too. He ran a hand through his hair, then asked, So what do we do? Natasha shrugged. Talk to him, try to understand why he's proud of it, see what we can do to help him. Steve opened his mouth to talk, but Natasha quickly put her finger up. We ask him what he wants us to do, not assume based on past experiences of ours. Steve chuckled and nodded. Okay, I get it. He smiled and got up. Thanks for the help. Natasha got up too, smiling back at him. Any time, Steve. A few days later, Steve was in the living room of the compound reading a book. He wanted to talk to Tony about his conversation with Natasha, but didn't know exactly when or how to approach it. He had a feeling he wouldn't be able to just pull him aside for a conversation after the next team meeting, seeing as how the last one went, so he spent the last few days either distracting himself or trying to come up with a plan. Friday announced over the loudspeaker, Captain Rogers, boss will be arriving soon to talk. Before Steve could even process what it said, Tony walked through the doors. He set down his book and stood up, walking over to him. Tony, me first, Tony interrupted. This time Tony seemed to have a stress ball on him, tossing it between his hands. He stopped the tossing and pointed at Steve. You're an arse. Implying that I don't understand my own diagnosis, comparing myself to you, saying that I need a serum to fix my brain. That's fucked up. Steve crossed his arms. That's not what I said. Tony raised his arms in surrender. Fair. That's how I heard it, though. He started wandering around the couches, the classic Tony Stark walk and talk. That shit hurt. But maybe I should have stayed. He glanced over at Steve. Maybe I could have said that I needed 10 and come back. Could have maybe explained some things that were clearly misunderstood. That would have been smart. He stopped in front of Steve and said, And I am very smart. Steve chuckled, shaking his head and looking down in disbelief. Oh, you don't think I'm smart? Tony smirked, going back to tossing the ball between his hands. You wound me, Cap, my best attribute. Steve put his hands up with a smile. Again, not what I meant. He looked back up at Tony and said, I talked with Natasha after, come to find out that I didn't actually watch the entire press conference. Now that would have been smart. Well, I'm not known as a genius, am I? Steve smiled and took a deep breath. I didn't understand, I still don't understand, how you can be proud of it. To me, when I grew up, having any sort of illness was frowned upon. You either had to get fixed or were shunned away, and clearly the world has changed a bit. He heard Tony snort. I want to understand. The things I said very much upset you, and we just got the team back together. Steve stopped himself, then restarted. I care about you, Tony, not just as a teammate, but as a friend, and I know I've made a lot of mistakes on that front. He saw Tony look away from him. He took a deep breath. I want to make things right with you, with us, and this seems very important to you, so please explain to me so I can understand. The two stood in silence for a while, and Steve added on, In simple terms, again, I'm not a genius. Tony laughed and rocked in place a little, a bit grateful that Steve was giving him the time to think about what to say. Once he figured out the words, he said, Autism isn't an illness. If anything, it's a disorder, since its full title is Autism Spectrum Disorder, but I prefer you didn't call it that either. Steve nodded and asked, What should I call it then? Tony smiled a little, looking up. Just autism. He took a deep breath and continued. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder, which in simple terms mean that my brain was created and developed differently. It's not a sickness looking for a cure, it's just whatever genes my mom and Howard had to create me wired my brain in a way that caused me to develop this way. Steve bit his cheek to think about what Tony said. So, you were born with autism? Yes, I was born like this. Tony smiled a little and shrugged. There's also a whole debate about person-first language versus identity-first language I could get into with you right now, but I'll spare you the details. I'm sure you'll tell me about it another day. Definitely. The two men chuckled and went to another round of silence. Steve broke the silence. I still don't fully understand how you can be proud of it. I may have accidentally skipped the end of your speech, but I heard you tell your story. It sounded mostly miserable. How and why are you proud of it? The pride is honestly a bit of a social justice thing, if I'm honest, Tony chuckled. I think it's less of actually being proud you have a disability. Steve's eyes widened with shock, and Tony smirked. Yes, Cap, I said disability. Scary word, I know. Tony continued. It's less of being proud of having a disability, and more of just owning it. For pretty much the entirety of humankind, really in nature in general, it's survival of the fittest. You're different, you're shunned, like you said. Disabled people were always seen as less than, even today. The world is more progressive than ever, and there are still people out there who believe that if you need a wheelchair, you shouldn't even leave your house. Tony looked up at Steve. You could understand this, Cap. Steve squinted his eyes. What do you mean? Before the serum, you said it yourself. People saw no point in you trying to find a cure. You had chronic illnesses. You were disabled, Steve. Tony shrugged. Too bad super soldier eugenics got the better of you. Steve rapidly shook his head and waved his hands in front of him. Wait. Slow down. You're throwing too many bombshells at me at once. He ran a hand through his hair. And why do you keep throwing around that word? Disability and being disabled is not a bad thing, Cap. Believe me, I get it. When I heard I was disabled, I felt terrible about it. Tony looked up at him. No one wants to be disabled, but we can't let ourselves be scared of a word. He smirked and shrugged. It's just a word. Steve took a deep breath and walked over to the couch, sitting down and waving an arm out. Go on. Tony sat in the chair across from the couch. To get back to my point, disabled people have been shamed for existing for years, and it got to the point where people just had enough and decided to be unapologetic about it. The whole point of being prideful about your disability isn't to be like, I'm so happy to have something that causes me to have sensory issues and meltdowns and struggle in social situations. It's really to say, fuck everyone for telling me to be silent. I exist, and I deserve to be thought of the same as everyone else despite my struggles. And who knows, maybe you will actually find some good things. What good things? Well, in my case, my autism makes me an incredibly passionate person. I was able to get good at engineering to the point where I created my suits and synthesized a new element. Stimming is nice. Stimming? Pacing, tapping, waving my hands around. Basically think of any weird movement I do that irks you. That's stimming. Steve looked down with a hum, feeling a little ashamed. There are probably some positives to your disability too. Steve looked up at him with a slight glare. What do you mean? Think about your sense of justice, your strong moral code of what's right and wrong. Sure, yeah, some of that probably came from your mom, but your illnesses gave you a reason to fight, Tony said. It showed you firsthand how rude people can be, and you wanted to put a stop to it. That's a big part of who you are as a person. Huh. Steve never thought of it like that before. He thought back at his time before the serum with a bit of disdain. Yes, he thinks about the time he had with his ma, or growing up with Bucky, but he wished that he was healthy then so his life could be better. But after everything Tony said, yeah, he still likes that he is healthy now, but he thinks he can learn to not hate little unserum Steve. He was fighting for his life during a time where no one believed in him, and that time made him who he is today. Steve looked up at Tony with a smile. That was good, very thoughtful. Tony shrugged and smirked. What can I say? Genius. Steve chuckled and stood up, Tony soon following. The two walked over to each other and shook each other's hands. Thank you for explaining, Tony. Of course. Tony smiled and let go of his hand, heading towards the door. Please ask Friday for some articles or videos, something for you to do your own research. Steve chuckled. I will. Oh, and one more thing. Tony stopped him at the door and turned around to face him. Whatever you do, don't use the term Asperger's. And why's that? It was created by a Nazi. Well, fuck that guy. Work 5. Tony Stark reviews Stim toys. Tony Stark was sitting on the couch in his lab. In front of him was a coffee table full of toys. They all came in shapes and sizes, a colourful array of mostly reds, blues and purples, with some vibrant rainbows thrown into the mix. Dummy was holding a camera in front of it all, recording the scene in front of him. "Hi, I'm Tony Stark. I was asked by my wonderful intern to review these." Tony waved at the table in front of him. Fidget toys, or Stim toys as most autistic people seem to call them. I don't have all of them, so I'm only going to review the ones I got. It's quite a lot to get through. Tony waved at the table again. I have more than enough time in my day, so why not? He shrugged and leaned forward to look through the toys. If you disagree with my opinion, then you're just wrong. Let's start with a classic. He grabbed the solid black cube and tossed it into the air, catching it and showing it off to the camera. The Fidget cube. The first fidget I actually got after my whole "you're actually autistic" discovery thing. Tony started messing around with the cube, rolling the little black ball with his thumb and then moving his thumb up to flick the switch. I actually quite enjoy this one. It's a simple one, like I said earlier, a classic. I probably enjoy the switch in Little Gears the most, 'cause, mechanic. Tony chuckled. But yeah, 10 out of 10, would recommend again. Now here's something I remember even back in college. Tony put down the fidget cube and grabbed the 3 circular toys on the table. Stress balls. Now I had a simple black one back in college that I used to bring with me everywhere. Think I broke that damn thing with how much I used it. He set down 2 of the balls, keeping up a blue one. Its use is shown by the crinkled white lines throughout it. This one being similar to the ones I had then. He tossed it up in the air, catching it with one hand. Another good and classic choice, but as you can see there are others. He stopped tossing the black ball and picked up the red one in his lap. This one is a little different. Instead of it keeping its round shape, it has this sort of clay inside. Tony started squeezing and stretching the ball, trying to show it off to the camera. I don't know how much you can see it, but it's a different texture. Tony then shrugged. I like it. It gives you a bit more to do than just squeeze the ball. Tony glanced at the camera with a smirk. You can also stretch and tug at it. It's cool. He smiled, then picked up the yellow ball. Now this, on the other hand, is a monstrosity. You'll think it's cool because look, a stress ball with little Orbeez in there. Orbeez are cool, right? How could you not enjoy this? Tony squeezed the yellow Orbeez ball. When he squeezed it, the Orbeez squished together, making a noise indicating so. Tony squeezed his eyes shut, clearly not liking the sound it makes. Why is it so wet? It sounds so juicy in there and I physically cringe every time I hear it, and the texture of the actual ball itself is horrible. I don't know how you people like it. He threw the ball away off screen. I'm throwing that ball away when I'm done with this. My intern likes the texture of it more than I do, but he also can't stand the sound. Tony wiggled his fingers a little bit, seemingly as a way to get rid of the horrible feeling texture he just endured. After a few seconds of this, he then put the 2 remaining stress balls back and grabbed the next fidget. Now I have 2 of these. I can't find my blue and green one, so I guess we'll just have to deal with cap colours instead. He picked up a small red, white and blue square poppet. Poppets have become the new fidget craze, and I'll be honest, I don't fully understand the appeal. Then why do I have 2, you may ask? They were both gifts. My blue and green one is from my intern. Most of these are from my intern. And this one, he held up the poppet in his hand, better showing it off to the camera, was from one of you. Congrats on the autism diagnosis, Mr. Tony Stark. Here's a fidget toy for you. #TeamCap. Tony rolled his eyes. That's actually what the letter said. You could have at least gotten the shield. I've been online. I've seen some of the crazy designs these toys can come in, and I know that there are cap shield poppets out there. There's also some of my helmet, which is cool. Tony smiled and looked down at the toy. I've talked all about this without really reviewing it. The popping isn't really my thing. I thought it would be a lot quieter. If I do use it, I just wiggle it around because it's silicone and you can do that. Not my thing. He tossed it back on the table. Tony then picked up a fidget that was very far outside of Tony's aesthetic. It was a rainbow tie-dye fidget spinner, with the ends of the spinner having pop-it bubbles. He stared at the camera, just holding the fidget. Rhodey got this for me once as a gag. He knew I'd hate it. Once again, I never understood the appeal of fidget spinners. I don't get how that's satisfying to fidget or stim with. Add in the poppet, which I also wasn't a fan of, and make it this colourful tie-dye mess. He gave the middle finger to the camera. Fuck you, honey bear. Let's get back to one I actually like, shall we? Tony put down the poppet fidget spinner and picked up the next fidget. These are called wacky tracks. Not a big fan of the name, but I wouldn't know what else to call it, so I won't complain too much. His was orange and blue, all the links were connected and he was moving them in his hands, bending it into weird shapes. I really like this one, as I said. It makes like a satisfying clicking noise which you move it. You can twist it and kind of build it into different shapes. I have a bunch of these, all different colours and sizes. Tony trailed off, losing his focus on the video and having all of his attention on the stim. The next minute of the video is Tony playing with said fidget, meticulously moving it around, forming shapes and patterns that he has seemingly done hundreds of times. The only sound being made are the clickings of the links. After a minute, Tony looks up and stills, sheepishly smiling as he forgot that he was recording. He waved the toy and said, "Probably my favourite." He then sighed. The only downside is that it's quite loud, so I don't bring this out in public too much. Plus, I get easily distracted with it. There was a slight flush of his cheeks as he put down the wacky tracks and picked up his smallest fidget yet. This is typically what I bring out in public nowadays. He moved close to the camera now properly to show it off. It was 2 circular chains with the pieces of red rubber on either side. This is one of probably 20 bike chain fidgets I have. I love the wacky tracks, but they are very noticeable in public and take up too much of my attention. These, the perfect fidget. Tony smiled and started to play with it. They're small, quiet, nice to stim with, doesn't take away my focus. Funny how my 2 favourite fidgets are the most mechanical and techy. Tony chuckled and shrugged. Makes sense. He was moving it between his fingers, giving each of the tips a squeeze before moving it to the next one. So yeah, if you see me out in public fidgeting or stimming with something, it's probably this. Since we did my 2 favourite fidgets, let's do 2 of my intern's favourites. Tony smiled softly, picking up a fidget that's purple and slightly holographic. This is a tangle. This is my intern's absolutely favourite stim toy. He always has one on him. We probably got 10 of them in just the lab here, more upstairs, and I know he has a bunch at home. Tony chuckled, tangling it across his fingers. It is fun, I won't lie. I probably just don't play with them as much because my intern always does, but these are nice to stim with. Tony put down the tangle and grabbed the largest and most colourful fidget he had. He held it in the palm of his hand and stared at the camera. This is Jerry. He's a rainbow sensory slug. Tony started moving the slug between his hands, the soft clicking of sounds coming through. I don't understand his obsession with these. He doesn't really play with them, he just likes to hold them and claim they are his son. He chuckled amused and shrugged. The sound it makes is nice. I like the more harsher clicking noises of wacky tracks more, but I can see why this is soothing. But it's a 3D printed slug. There's 2 of these guys, and they both have names. Sometimes he just puts them on a table and they watch us do lab work. I don't get it. Tony sighed and put it back on the table. 2 more, then we're done. Tony then grabbed the galaxy-coloured cube, and with one hand he was able to unfold the cube back into a rectangle, and back into a cube. He grabbed it with the other hand and did this same pattern, with a bit more speed. This is called the infinity cube. Pretty much all you do with it is move it in and out of the cube shape, but it's still a nice one to play with. As you can see from all of the white, we've played with this one a lot. Tony moved the infinity cube up to the camera to show off the large white spots where the design is chipping away from the constant use. I used to play with this one all the time, then I discovered the wacky tracks and kind of forgot about this. Maybe I'll try to use it more. Tony smiled and set it down. Final one. Tony lastly picked up a green, black and red marble mesh. This is another one I like to bring with me out in public. It comes in a lot of colours and designs, but it's simple to play with. You can stretch it, push the marble. My favourite thing to do is to put one end against my pinky, the other against my thumb, push it in so it's kinda like a cube. Then you set it against your palm and shake back and forth. You'd feel the marble against your palm. Tony did what he described and smiled. It's honestly quite a nice feeling. Instead of putting the toy down like all the others, he kept it in his hand while saying the outro. Well, you just watched a however many minute long video on Tony Stark playing with toys. I hope you enjoy wasting your life. Tony chuckled, then shrugged. Nah, fidget toys, Stim toys, whatever you want to call them are nice. It's nice that kids get to have these, but I feel like people forget that adults can use them too, and sometimes they even need them. I'm constantly doing stuff with my hands. It's one of the reasons why I love engineering and building, constant busy work. And finding out there were toys, or really tools, that are designed for people who also like doing constant busy work. Tony shrugged again. It was nice. He tossed up the marble mesh in the air, caught it, then said, Well, I'm done here. Hope you've learned something, or maybe discovered a tool you can use in your life. Tony gave a peace sign to the camera. You know who I am. Now get out of here.
Work 6. The Public versus Autistic Tony Stark. Chapter 1. Infantilization. Tony was originally out with Happy to run some errands. By running errands, he means buying some more supplies at the hardware store and grabbing a cheeseburger. After lunch, he mentioned to Happy that he wanted to go on a walk, alone. Happy originally said no, but then compromised by walking a few feet behind him. Every once in a while, Tony liked to take a walk around Central Park. He loved living in cities, but ever since he was a kid, he dreamed of living a quiet life. Living in a small cabin, perhaps beside a lake, out in the middle of nowhere. An escape from the crazy life he's always lived. Now he can't exactly do that, especially now with the Avengers and Peter, so he makes do by going on walks through the great NYC parks. During these walks he also likes to think. Not just of the quiet life dream, but of his life in general. He's learned over the years that these walks can help him process major life events. Driving is another tactic he liked to use, but it was more difficult to get into that calm driving state when dealing with NYC traffic, so driving was utilised more when he stayed in Malibu or upstate. During these walks he'd think about what has been going on, his thoughts and emotions surrounding the events. He struggles with that stuff anyway, but he struggles with it even more when his mind is focused on something else. So that's why he doesn't go to the lab. Yes, it calms him, but he very easily gets distracted and hyper-focused on some project, so a walk in nature it is. Taking up Tony's mind was the press conference, more accurately people's immediate response to it. These type of announcements always come in two waves. The first wave is shock. They take the announcement at face value and react to it. Tony Stark as Iron Man, the news of the century. Tony Stark confirmed superhero. The second wave are the responses. This is where the PR team really gets to work. An outwave of public opinions come crashing in. Friend or foe? Is Iron Man dangerous? Can Tony Stark be trusted? He's never liked that second wave, the public's opinion. He didn't care much after Iron Man. He felt on top of the world and simply lucky to be alive. He is scared shitless about Wave 2 this time around. As much as he claims Iron Man is him, it's more of just a part of him, his best attributes put into a superhero. This recent announcement, it's literally how he is as a human. If people have negative feelings about this diagnosis, then they have negative feelings about him. And sure, many, many people have hated Tony in the past. But this felt different. All of the other times were his behaviours. Many of the risky stuff he did was his own choice. Even if he regrets that choice now, or even felt bad about it then, it was still his decision. This time, though, they'd be hating on him for something he can't control, something he can't change, which made him nervous about the public reaction. "Hi there, are you Tony Stark?" Tony got pulled out of his thoughts to see an older lady in front of him. He fixed his posture and smiled at her. "That is me." "Oh great, that's wonderful. Would you mind signing something for my grandson?"
The lady pulled out a journal and a pen in her purse. Why do ladies have everything in their purses? She then looked up at Tony, waiting for an answer. Tony smiled again and grabbed the journal. Don't mind at all. He took the pen and journal, then flipped through the pages to find an empty one. What's the kid's name? Mason. Oh, he's such a sweet boy. The old lady smiled and put her hand on her heart. She then leaned into him, whispering like she was telling him a secret. He's autistic, like you. Tony paused, glancing over at the lady. Oh? Yeah, he always wanted to be a superhero. We always said that he already was, that autism was his superpower. Tony's eyes widened. The lady continued. But now he can see someone who used their autism to become a superhero. Tony bit his cheek, incredibly grateful for the sunglasses, because he knows he is giving some hardcore glares. I wouldn't really say my autism is what made me a superhero. Oh, nonsense, sweetheart, the lady lightly slapped his arm, Tony's muscles tensing. Your autism made you smart enough to build those suits you use to fly around. That's part of your superpower. I mean, I guess, but nothing, the lady laughed, squeezing his arm. You and Mason always doubt your own abilities. You can't let your autism define you. I always have to remind him that he's not disabled, she said, with a hint of disgust in her tone. You two are differently abled. You have got to be kidding me. Ma'am, I don't. Oh, hush, don't worry about it, the lady laughed. You and Mason always trying to correct the adults. I am an adult. She smiled and pointed at the journal. Just right. Mason, you are the best superhero I know, Tony Stark. You got that? Tony simply nodded, knowing he would sound incredibly rude if he spoke. He wrote down exactly what she said, noticing the slight shake in his handwriting, then passed it back over to the old lady. She smiled wide and gave him a hug. Thank you so much, Tony. Mason is going to love this. She let go of the hug and started walking away. Take care of yourself, sweetie. Tony just stood there, taking deep breaths and rubbing his fingers. A minute later, Happy comes up to him. Everything all right, boss? He was quiet for a little bit longer. He took a shaky breath, then whispered, Let's just go home. Chapter 2. Taking Away Resources. Tony was left shaken after that day in the park. He came back to the tower and immediately went to take a shower. The interaction felt weird. It wasn't necessarily a bad interaction. He just felt sort of patronised. He felt like a child. The random touching when he didn't ask or give permission to do so, being told how to sign the autograph like he hasn't done so his whole life, and the comments she made. How many times did he have to say it? Disabled isn't a bad word. And being told that autism itself was his superpower. Sure, some of the things that make him a superhero are related to his autism, but that doesn't make autism a superpower like having super speed. At least, not to him. The lady also appeared to forget that he is an adult. A few days pass and Tony eventually decides to move past it. He can't let one weird conversation ruin his whole life. He mainly says this though because he needs some new clothes. Call him old-fashioned, but he still prefers to shop for clothes in person, even if he uses online shopping for most purchases nowadays. Well, maybe you don't have to call him old-fashioned anymore, now that Tony has been diagnosed. He believed that he was, but after learning he's autistic, he realised it's because of sensory issues. Tony had a lot of struggles with clothes growing up. Anything too tight or too scratchy would lead him to a sensory overload, or even a meltdown. For a while he had to learn to suck it up. Stark men don't cry when wearing clothes. Stark men don't cry, period. But once he turned 15 and went to college, at that point being seen as a grown-up to his father, he would go out and buy his own clothes. His favourite place to get his more casual clothes, which is what he was currently planning on buying, is at the mall. He's ripped into one of too many of the long-sleeve shirts he likes to wear under his t-shirts, so he has to get new ones. His jeans are starting to become more and more like ripped jeans, which he is not a fan of, so he has to get more of those too. Tony didn't really hate them all. Sure, it could be busy at times, but he'd only get recognised by 2 or 3 people, which is extremely low compared to some other public places. He typically goes in more casual attire, today being one of the few good pairs of jeans he has left, along with an AC/DC t-shirt. He wears a hat and some sunglasses. He wears sunglasses in most indoor public places because, good lord, fluorescent lights make him want to die. And he's all good to go. Even though he typically buys the same brand of clothes every time, he still tries them on. He's had instances where they randomly change how they sew the seam and he has to find a different pair. It was awful when that happened. On a good day, he would stand there, take a few deep breaths, then go back and find another pair. On a bad day, he would end up crying in the dressing room stall, texting Happy or Pepper to pick him up. Again, back when he didn't know he was autistic, he felt humiliated by this. A grown man crying, asking his head of security and/or girlfriend to come pick him up, all over some clothes. Now that he knows these are sensory issues, well, he still felt slightly humiliated, but at least he had an explanation now. Luckily, though, both the shirt and pants stayed exactly the same. He bought the clothes and started heading back. He started heading back to his car when he walks by a store, stopping before it and staring inside. Every time he comes to the mall, he has to walk past the Laughing Place, a store in the mall that sells a bunch of fidgets. The store, more accurately the fidgets they sell, have always intrigued them. Sure, there are a lot of the same Stim toys he's used to seeing, but there are a bunch in there he wanted to try. Keyboard clickers, Nido cubes, morph worms and so much more. Tony was nervous to go in before his diagnosis. What if someone recognised him? What would they think? But he's officially diagnosed now, and the whole world knows it. He decides, fuck it, and goes into the store. He walks in and feels immediately overwhelmed. There are just so many fidgets. He rubs his fingers together and looks around, deciding to look at the Stims that piqued his interest in the first place. He wandered over to the keyboard clickers. Before he invented holograms, Tony had a weird hit or miss with keyboards. Sometimes the sound, or more often than not the feel of pressing the keys themselves would set him off. And while he enjoyed the sound of a clicky keyboard, the hit or miss made him switch to completely using holograms. When he heard about keyboard clickers, it intrigued him. He felt weird though asking Peter to get them for him, or anyone really. Peter just so happens to be the one buying him Stims the most. And much like clothes, he wanted to try them out first before solidifying. He picked one up in a light purple shade and started to press his thumb against it. As soon as he started stimming with it, a man who was previously looking at a poppet came up to him and said, "My daughter loves those. She brings one with her everywhere." Why do people feel the need to come up to strangers and talk to them? That's cool. The man nodded, picking one up himself and asking, "Getting one for your kid?" Tony took a deep breath. "Own it. Don't hide away." "No, it's for myself." The man looked up at him with a slight glare, squinting his eyes. "You know these are for kids, right?" Tony squeezed his eyes shut. "Please, not again." "Adults can use them too." "You're a functioning adult. You shouldn't—" "Oh." The man sighed, crossing his arms. "You're Tony Stark, aren't you?" Tony bit his cheek and nodded. "Yup." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "So, definitely not a functioning adult." "Well, it never appeared to be the case," the man said bluntly. "Sure, maybe you did some shit in the 90s that was stupid teenager stuff, but everyone does that." The man shook the fidget in his hand. "You don't need this. My daughter cannot function without this shit, man. You can run a whole damn company." "It's actually Pepper Potts who—" "Doesn't matter," he started to shout. "You're taking away resources from people who have it way worse than you. And why? Because you want to feel special?" Hey, what's going on?" An employee of the store, who must have heard the man's shouting, came over. "Is everything all right?" "Yeah," Tony whispered, voice cracking a bit. He set the keyboard clicker down and put his hands in his pockets. "I was just leaving." He glanced back at the man, who had a smirk on his face. The employee was saying something else, but he didn't hear it. He just left with his clothes, not getting another fidget. It was always hit or miss with keyboards. Chapter 3. Slurs. Tony stops playing with Stim toys for the next few days after that interaction. He felt so ashamed. He's supposed to be this big, confident man. It doesn't matter what people think. He's Tony Stark. He can do whatever he wants. But then a father, his mind provides, tells him he can't use a simple Stim toy. He crumbles, falls apart. His mind goes on rapid tangents of, "You don't need this, you don't deserve to use these, they're just stupid kids' toys, why do you need them?" It wasn't until Peter's lab day that he started using them again. The kid noticed how Tony would be constantly eyeing his toys, even on occasion reaching out to grab one. But whenever Peter asked if he wanted to use them, he would always say no. Eventually, Peter was able to get Tony to explain what happened, and the kid gave him the boost of confidence he needed to start using the Stim toys again. After Peter left, Tony started doing research on one thing the guy said that bothered him: taking away resources. Turns out there really aren't any resources to take away, especially for autistic adults. There are schools and programs for autistic children, and sure, there are some programs for autistic adults too, but most of the programs he sees are for those with consistent high support needs. Plus, he assumed the guy, based off of how the conversation started, was talking about stuff like Stim toys or noise-cancelling headphones, which are not only for autistic children, or just autistic people in general, and are sold in a lot of public schools, including online. So basically, the man had no clue what he was talking about, and just shaming Tony for no reason. Cool. The next week rolls around and Pepper reminds Tony, aka telling him for the first time since he never remembers, about a presentation he's giving at a high school. A bunch of the top NYC private schools' robotics clubs are getting together for a robotics competition. The winning team receives $20,000 in scholarship money per person towards a degree in engineering, which is being funded by none other than Stark Industries. "Just talk about your time at MIT and building dummy," Pepper had said. So with only a day until the competition, he started writing a speech, which, to be fair, is considerably earlier than most times. The next day he drives to the high school where the event will take place and immediately heads to the principal's office. The principal, who he learns is named Mr. Bryant, tells him about the event and when he will give his speech. "All these kids are so clever. Every year I swear they just get smarter and smarter, and this money will help change these kids' lives. Thank you, Mr. Stark, for doing this. It's an honour to have you here." "It's my pleasure," he smiled. They had Tony arrive an hour before the kids came, mainly so he could tour the gym and do a quick run-through of his PowerPoint, which totally wasn't worked on during the car ride up. After they got the PowerPoint working, Tony went off and hid in the storage room that held all the gym equipment. Before every speech he's given, he always tries to find a space to hide out in. He thought before it was because he didn't want people to constantly harass him before he had to speak, which is still true, but it goes so much deeper than that. After his diagnosis, he realised it was to preserve his energy. He couldn't mingle and talk with multiple people, and then have the spotlight on him while he essentially talks to everyone again. So he hides out. It also allows him to get out whatever nervous energy he has, and often without everyone looking at him. He often paces, rubs his fingers together, flaps his hands, all while reciting the speech in his head or quietly whispering it. Today he ended up bringing one of his bike chain fidgets, which he used while pacing. About 5 minutes before he was meant to give his speech, the principal came in and asked if he was ready to head out. Tony checked his watch. He can handle 5 minutes of being surrounded by multiple loud teenagers, so he nodded. He walks out and the already loud teenagers he heard within the storage room get about 10 times louder. He squeezes his eyes shut for a second because closing your eyes totally helps with the noise, right? He opened his eyes back up and they walk over to the computer to reset his PowerPoint. Why they couldn't have kept it up all the time? Who knows? It's at this point the teens notice that the Tony Stark is there, and a wave of excited shouts directed at him fill the room. Tony gives the teens a small smile and wave before focusing back on the computer. "Tony Stark is a retard!" Tony jerks his head over at the crowd. All of the teens look at the boy, who presumably said the word. Some of them are laughing with the boy, others are shouting at him, while others are quietly glancing between the boy and him. 3 of the staff members immediately yell at the boy, taking him out to the hallway. One of them happened to be Mr. Bryant, who before going out in the hallway with the others, he comes back over to Tony and says, "I am so sorry, Mr. Stark. We are going to handle this issue now with him. We'll start this event and have you speak a little later. Please, just try to relax. And again, I deeply apologise for his behaviour." The principal runs off and Tony sits down in a seat nearby. If you looked up the definition of privilege in the dictionary, you would find a picture of Tony Stark. Okay, you wouldn't, but Tony is well aware of his privilege. He's white, cis, mostly straight male. He grew up rich, he's always had power, he's able-bodied, and even though he has struggled, he's been able to function mostly on his own. He's never really had to deal with discrimination, with slurs. Sure, his father and a couple of people at college called him the F-slur, but he's only ever dated women, so he never felt like it was directly targeting him, who he is. This was the first time someone had ever called him that. Again, because of his intelligence, his privilege, he's never been called that word, at least not to his face. Tony rapidly bounced his leg. Of course he's heard the word before. He grew up in the 70s and 80s. That word was used to call someone dumb. And while many words were thrown at Tony throughout his schooling years, he was never called dumb or the R-slur. He also knew the word was used to describe mentally challenged people. So that's what he was now, mentally challenged. He felt weird, kind of horrible. Some scumbag of a kid thought he should insult Tony's entire character, all because of a diagnosis he received. Just because the kid thought it was funny. He felt terrible. Imagine having to deal with that every day for your whole life. He felt bad for the people with less privilege than him. Eventually the principal comes back in, tapping Tony on the shoulder. He jerks out of his thoughts and looks up at him. "We talked to the student. We do not respect bullying or discrimination of any kind, so we decided the best course of action would to be not allow him to participate in the event. If his team wins the competition, he will still receive the money as we thought that would be unfair, but he will not be participating in the actual building of the robot," Mr. Bryant said. "Again, I deeply apologise for this student's behaviour." All Tony could do was nod in that moment. Mr. Bryant stared at him for a few seconds before nodding himself. "Well then, we need to get this thing started, huh? Still feeling up for inspiring these kids?" Tony flashed a smile, his signature, and very fake, smile. "Definitely." "Awesome. I'll give the opening speech, introduce you on, you talk for a bit, and then I'll come back to start the competition." Tony once again nodded. The whole event went by in a blur. He barely heard Mr. Bryant talking, only hearing his name and being called up. He went on to talk about building dummy, and briefly on his time being an engineering student. Tony's become quite good at the talking while having no clue what you're saying ordeal. He finishes his speech and sits back down the whole time the students are in the building, half aware of where he is. At the end, he looks at each student's builds, doesn't contribute much to the judging, then a winner is announced. He doesn't know which team won, other than it wasn't the team who had the boy. He took a photo with the winners and then immediately left. He sat in his car for 10 minutes, borderline dissociated from everything that happened. Then he drives himself home. Chapter 4. Everyone's a little autistic. Tony ended up shutting down the rest of the day. When Pepper came home, she saw him curled up on the couch. The weighted blanket they recently got was wrapped around him, and he was blankly staring at the coffee table. She ended up comforting him the rest of the night. He couldn't talk until the next morning. When he told her what happened, she wrapped him into a hug, reassuring him that he wasn't that word, and that the teen was an immature arsehole who needed to learn a little respect. She was right, of course. Pepper's always right. Pepper then suggests a date night. Go out to a restaurant and enjoy their time together. Doesn't have to be anywhere fancy, just somewhere where we can have a lovely meal and enjoy each other's company. How does that sound? Tony smiled. Sounds nice. Pepper rubbed his hand with hers. I have time next Saturday. Tony smiled again and nodded. It's a date. The next Saturday rolled by. The two decided to go to a local Italian restaurant they both liked for the date. It wasn't a high-class fancy restaurant, but it wasn't cheap either. The place was owned by Italian immigrants and is now run by their children. They serve real, high-quality Italian dishes that remind Tony of his mother's cooking, one of the few things that remind him of home. Even though it wasn't a fine dining restaurant, they still wanted to dress nice. Tony decided on a grey button-up shirt, a black blazer with some black pants, simple yet sophisticated. As he was combing through his hair, Pepper came into the room wearing a red dress. Tony saw her through the mirror and flushed. He put the comb down and turned to face her. "Well, now I feel underdressed." Pepper chuckled. "You look fine." She walked over and ran her fingers through his hair. "Handsome, even." Tony smiled, rubbing his fingers together. "You look beautiful, as always." "You flatter me." She leaned in to kiss him, then grabbed onto his hands, allowing him to stim with them. They stand like that for a few seconds, then Pepper asked, "Ready to go?" Tony smiled and replied with a nod, which made Pepper smile. "Let's go then." Tony drives them to the restaurant, which, even with NYC traffic, is only about 15 minutes away. He parks the car and the two head in the restaurant. Once they get seated, a waitress almost immediately comes over. She appears to be in her mid-20s and says, "Before anything else, are you Tony Stark and Pepper Potts?" Tony and Pepper smiled and nodded. Pepper verbally answered by saying, "Yes, we are." "Oh my god, that is so cool." The waitress smiles wide. "Well, my name is Emily, and I'm very honoured to serve you two. Anything I can get you two for drinks?" Tony glances up at her and says, "I'll take a coffee and an ice water." "Just an ice water for me," Pepper replies. "I'll get those right in for you two." The two watched as the waitress practically bounced away. Pepper chuckled and reached over the table to hold Tony's hands. "She seemed happy to see us." Tony chuckled as well. "Yeah, maybe." He grabbed hold of Pepper's hands, once again stimming with them. "Have I ever told you how much I love playing with your hands?" Pepper glanced down at their hands and back up at him. "Playing with my hands? I think a couple of times." "No, I mean..." Tony huffed and squeezed their hands, trying to figure out how to word his thoughts and feelings. "I mean, after the diagnosis and everything, have I really explained it to you?" Pepper thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I don't think you have." "Well, I really like it 'cause... Well, have I told you what stimming is?" He glances up to see Pepper nod. "Right, I like to use my hands a lot for stimming, and what I'm doing now is stimming." He raises their hands up to show her. "And I really like stimming with your hands because, like, I love you, you know? And stimming with you just feels nice, like I'm..." Tony sighed and let go of her, now rubbing his fingers against his palm. "I don't think I'm explaining it right." "I think I understand," Pepper smiles. "You feel accepted? You feel like you can share a part of yourself with someone you care about?" Tony nodded. Yes, that's exactly it." He went back to holding her hands. "You always know how I feel." "Not always, but I know you pretty well to have a rough estimate." Pepper smiled. She thought about it for a while, then said, "You never really know, do you?" "What do you mean?" "You never really know how you feel. Sure, you can get basic descriptors like good or bad, but never in detail, you know?" "Actually, I do know now," Tony smiled, the kind of smile he gives when he's about to share some random fun fact or ramble on about something he enjoys. "It's called alexithymia. It's when someone struggles to identify or describe what they're feeling." "Oh?" "Yeah, in Greek it roughly translates to no word for emotions, and it can be connected to interoception issues. So I could feel a pain in my stomach and be like, is that anxiety or am I hungry? That's why people who struggle with this often describe their emotions with physical descriptors." "Oh wow, that makes a lot of sense," Pepper replied with a smile. "What does interoception mean again?" "Oh, Sorry, it's the ability to interpret internal signals like hunger or going to the bathroom. Pepper raised her eyebrows. Is that why I have to remind you to eat and to go to bed? It is, Tony chuckled, looking away with embarrassment. I have pretty shit interoception. It's okay, honey. Now I know you can't help it. Right after the waitress comes back over with their drinks. Here you go, Mr. Stark and Miss Potts. Pepper was about to say thank you, but the waitress cut her off by saying, I heard you two talking about your autism. Tony and Pepper stare at each other. Pepper then looks at her. I don't see how that... You want to hear my honest opinion about it? Once again, Tony and Pepper were about to speak, but she cuts them off. I really do think that everyone's a little bit autistic. Tony bites his lip and glares down at the table. Pepper sees this and tries to say, Emily, ma'am, I don't think this is the time. I mean, you were talking about not remembering to eat. Sometimes I forget to eat. And small talk. Gosh, I may be a waitress now, but believe me, in my teens I was not good at it. She laughed. And, you know, everyone has hobbies that they're super into. I've been really getting into diamond art recently. That's not what it's like at all, Tony spat out. Pepper's eyes widened and looked over at him. Tony? The waitress looked confused. Oh, I wasn't saying there aren't other things you struggle with. I'm just saying that there are things everyone experiences that aren't just autistic struggles. But didn't you just say that you don't struggle with these things? You said sometimes you forget to eat. Sometimes. Tony? Sometimes you forget, but not every minute of every day, to the point where you need your AI and your girlfriend to remind you to eat because you've been so busy working on your next project and haven't left the lab in over 10 hours. Tony glanced up at the waitress. Oh yeah, those hobbies you were talking about aren't just hobbies. They are highly intensive focuses that you can focus so heavily on, it can cause you to forget to do all your basic human functions. Tony, I'm pretty sure she understands. And what was it that you said about small talk? Oh, I was bad as a teen. I'm goddamn near still 50, and I still struggle with it. Tony! Pepper shouted out. You're going to cause a scene. Tony suddenly remembered where he was. He glanced around the restaurant. People were staring at him. Some had their phones out. He couldn't take it anymore. He got up and bolted out of the restaurant. Pepper called out to Tony, but it was too late. She sighed and pulled out some cash. I apologise for his behaviour, but I will say your comments were not appropriate to say at all. She put the money down on the table. For the drinks. She left to go find Tony. She went outside and found Tony sitting curled up on the ground in front of the building. His eyes were shut and he was punching his leg. Pepper walked over and crouched down in front of him. Tony, sweetheart, please try not to hurt yourself. Why does this keep happening, Pep? Tony asked, his voice slightly cracking. He opened his eyes and Pepper could see tears forming. I can't go anywhere without someone making a comment about my autism. And why is it always so negative? Pepper sighed. I don't know, honey. She reached out her hand, inviting Tony to hold on to it if he wanted. I'm so sorry that it keeps happening, and I'm sorry that it happened during our date night. Tony accepted her hand, then mumbled, It's fine. It doesn't have to be. Pepper allowed him to silently play with her hand a bit more before saying, I've already paid for our drinks. I'm assuming you don't want to go back in. Tony let out a shaky breath, then shook his head. Yeah, I assumed so. Pepper let out a small smile. How about we run through Burger King, then go back home and watch shitty rom-coms tonight? Tony smirked, nodding and quietly saying, I'd like that. Pepper smiled and kissed his head. Great. She stood up and helped Tony get up. I'll drive. Give yourself some time to relax. Tony sighed but nodded, getting in the passenger's side of the car. He wiped his eyes and tried to forget about what just happened, instead focusing on redeeming his date night. Pepper made it easier to forget. The shitty rom-coms helped too, and he will always love a good old Burger King burger. But he still felt bad the rest of the night. Chapter 5. You're faking it. Of course someone posted a video online. Of course someone did. Tony was sitting in the living room on the couch. He had a pillow over his face and would occasionally scream into it. It wasn't the worst PR mess he's been in. He's certainly done and said worse things. He mostly just feels embarrassed. His team, and Pepper, had him release a statement basically saying how he apologises to the waitress, how she hit a sensitive spot during a bad week, but he recognises his bad behaviour and will work on it. I have no excuses, only issues and behaviours to work on in the future. Classic PR. People are mixed on it, of course they are. People are never satisfied. Tony is searching through the responses of people. Most they are just parroting the same opinion they've had for years. Tony Stark's a monster. Tony's done nothing wrong. Really, this is all the PR team's job. Go through all the public responses and see how to go forward from that. Which they still do. And Tony, almost always, follows through with the plan. Iron Man doesn't count. Tony, though, still typically reads through public responses. Some may call it self-obsession, some may call it torture, some may call it being informed. Whatever the reason, Tony does it. Currently he is on YouTube scrolling through videos and watching a few. Most are news stations or pop culture channels spilling the tea, whatever that means. Most videos are barely a minute long. The longest one he saw was 3 minutes, and that's because they also touched on the press conference. He went back to the homepage and then saw a video in his recommended section, one titled, Dear Tony Stark, stop faking it. Tony was curious, faking what exactly? So he clicked on the video. The video was shot in this person's bedroom. The screen showed their bed, and on their wall had a bunch of Pokemon and anime posters. They were wearing a red shirt that said, Actually Autistic. They had a couple of tattoos on their arm, including some Pokemon, and their hair was shaved into a mullet style and was dyed pink. The person started speaking. Hi, my name is Mel. I use they-them pronouns, and I am actually autistic, unlike the topic of this video. Tony raised his eyebrows. What? Yup, a bit of a different video today. Normally I talk about different theories from my favourite animes, or I do reviews and analyse certain aspects of the Pokemon games, but I'm just sick and tired of this rich motherfucker pretending to have a real condition that millions of people actually struggle with. Normally Tony would roll his eyes at the rich person comment. He knows people hate him just because he's rich, that's a fact of life since he was conceived, maybe even before that. But he didn't. He couldn't. Pretending to have a condition. Autism. An autistic person really believed he was faking having it. We all know Tony Stark. A picture of him came up beside Mel. He's the richest person in the world, he's Iron Man, he's super smart. Well, a few months ago, he announced to the world that he is #actually autistic. Mel rolled their eyes. I'm so sick and tired of people pretending to be autistic because it's cool and trendy. In case you don't know, autism is an actual disorder. It's a neurological disorder. It means it's something you're born with and struggle with your whole life. He knows this. I know this. A bit of backstory of me first, Mel said. I was diagnosed at 5 years old. I was making no eye contact with anyone. I lived in my own little world. I was talking, but only about the things that interested me, which of course was Pokemon. I couldn't go to school because of this. I was homeschooled my whole life. I may seem fine now, but it's after years of therapy and many autistic social groups that have helped me get to this point. Look, I watched that press conference thing, they said. Everything he's describing isn't really autism. They leaned forward towards the camera. You've got to remember, Tony Stark is the richest and one of the most powerful people in the world, so do you really believe all the things he, quote, struggled with are really autistic struggles? Or was he always just an egotist who believed he was better than everyone else and had to deal with the consequences of that? Shall we go through this thing line by line, shall we? No, please don't. Mel looked down at a piece of paper, which supposedly had quotes from the press conference he gave. He was quiet, didn't play with toys, a prodigy. They looked back up at the camera. Okay, there are a lot of quiet kids, and lots of autistic people are actually quite loud. Didn't play with toys? Sounds like your mom and dad just didn't love you. They shrugged. Fucking ouch. And a prodigy. Look, this is just perpetuating the stereotype that autistic people have to be amazing at something, when really you can just be a normal person. You don't have to be this amazing prodigy of a child to be autistic, and I believe he only really said this to boost his ego. Yep, boosting my ego during an emotionally vulnerable press conference. Mel looked back at the paper. By 4 he didn't speak more than 10 words. How the fuck would you remember that? Struggled to put on clothes? They glanced up. You know, like a normal child. They looked back at the paper, moving his hands in, quote, weird ways. They rolled their eyes again and looked back up. This is where I start to get pissed off. Stimming isn't weird, Tony Stark. It's self-regulatory behaviours, and it helps us actually autistic folks calm down and process the world, and you're just making fun of it, just, ugh. Mel punches their bed a couple of times. It makes me so unbelievably angry that you don't understand this, and yet trying to make it seem like you have it. Tony's heart started to race a little. He took a shaky breath. I do understand. That's just what my father said. The last 2 points he brings up before lying to the world. I'm not lying. Oh, the fact that he used to cry in front of the cameras and paparazzi, and this time in school. These two have simple explanations too. The paparazzi sucks. No one likes them. Anyone would act like that. They invade your privacy. Not liking your privacy invaded doesn't mean you're autistic. It just means you're a normal fucking person. I said I hated it because of the flashing lights and overlapping voices, not the privacy aspect. And the school thing, Mel sighed. He literally says he was 7 in a class full of 10-year-olds. You don't have to dig deeper than that. If you so desperately want to, maybe your classmates didn't like you because how much of a narcissist you are. I wasn't like that as a kid. So apart from everything we covered in the press conference that can easily be explained by normal childhood behaviours and narcissism, what evidence do we really have? Maybe the diagnosis document that was leaked? And you may say, oh, the documents. Those can easily be faked. And how come it was only Tony's diagnosis that was leaked? Why not the whole building? They were. You just don't know because they aren't famous celebrities. And isn't it a little funny? Mel leaned forwards towards the camera. How all of this happened after the Civil War debacle. The Avengers have fallen apart. Tony Stark's image is lower than ever. Why not try to save face? They smile. Tony's heart drops. Moral of the story, Mel leans back to their original position. A rich white man fakes a condition that will give him attention and clout, ruining the reputation of a real disorder, in order to save his own reputation. Mel stares directly into the camera. Tony Stark, if you ever end up watching this, I hope you do. Just know that we, the actually autistic community, the ones who have actually struggled through life and couldn't just buy everything under the sun, we do not support you. We do not believe you. You are a liar, a narcissist, and someone who really needs to learn what real struggles are. You don't have struggles. You're the most privileged person on the planet, and faking a diagnosis isn't going to get you anywhere. So just admit that you're faking and leave us alone. We don't want you ruining this community, especially because you were never part of it to begin with. The video ends. Tony panics. He shuts off the laptop and slides off the couch. His breathing rapidly quickens, and the rocking starts. He shakes his head, whispering, no, 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 over and over and over again. Everything that Mel said in the video runs through his head. Everything he's experienced was just normal. That he was making fun of the condition. That he was lying about everything. Faking. He was faking everything. We do not support you. We don't believe you. An autistic person said that. He had a feeling that neurotypical people wouldn't believe him, that they wouldn't support him. He expected that. But an autistic person to say that. Someone from his own community. Oh, right. You were never part of it to begin with. How foolish he was to believe that he had found a group of people who would accept him. No, Tony Stark will forever be the pathetic, traumatised rich boy that nobody likes. How selfish was he to try and find something that could explain his issues? No, the issue was always him. It couldn't be explained by autism, because it wasn't. It was just him, Tony Stark, an attention seeker, a narcissist, a liar. He curled up and sobbed the rest of the night. Chapter 6. Giving Hope. Tony was walking through Central Park. He hasn't gone out in public much recently. He's had a couple of pretty major meltdowns, then fell into a bit of depression. The imposter syndrome, as Peter told him it was called, was running pretty high for a while. Honestly, it still was. He didn't want to leave the house, and he was only out now because Pepper basically forced him to. So he got dressed in a more casual disguise and wandered around Central Park. His movements were slow. He felt very closed off. Last time he went on one of these walks, he was thinking about how people would react to the news of his diagnosis, about how Wave 2 would go. Now he's back at the park and has a pretty good taste of it now. Overall, pretty shit. Didn't help that he has had so many weird or downright terrible interactions in public. That's one thing that pisses him off, when people say the celebrities and famous people have it 100% easy. Yes, a lot of things are easier, but because of your fame, people believe they can just say stuff to you. That you won't have feelings or opinions because you're famous. That you can say whatever bullshit or harmful opinion you want, and it won't matter in the end because you are famous. The quiet life didn't sound bad. While he's walking, he notices a teenage boy, who at first was talking to presumably his mother, now walking towards him. The boy had headphones on, was wearing an Iron Man sweater. That made Tony smirk a little. And he was holding a tangle? The teen came up to him, the mother close behind, but still giving them space. Once the boy was in front of Tony, he said, "Hi, are you Tony Stark?" Upon closer inspection, Tony now noticed the headphones were a pair of noise-cancelling headphones. He lightly smiled at the kid and nodded. He noticed the boy tried to contain his excitement, yet he still smiled brightly and bounced on his toes. He glanced back at his mother, who shook the phone in her hands. He turned back to Tony and asked, "May I please have a picture taken with you?" Tony smiled again at the teen. "Sure. What's your name, kid?" "Anthony Michael Brown." "A pleasure to meet you, Anthony Michael Brown." He glanced over at the mother to see her affectionately roll her eyes. He looked back at the kid and said, "You know, my full name is actually Anthony, too." "I know, I like to say I was named after you, even though my mom says that wasn't the case." Anthony chuckled, then looked at his mother. "How do you want me to pose?" The mother shrugged with a small smile. "You choose, bud." Anthony looked up at Tony. He struggled as well and said, "Whatever you want to do." The boy rocked for a few seconds, tapping a finger to his head to mimic thinking. He looked up shyly and asked, "Can we do the repulsor move, like on my sweater?" He pointed down at the sweater he was wearing, showing Iron Man almost straight up, with one hand pointing out like he was going to shoot. "Sounds cool, kid." Tony moved next to him and asked, "You okay with touch, or would rather just stand next to each other?" Anthony responded by wrapping an arm around his waist, which made Tony chuckle. He wrapped his arm around the teen's shoulder, and they both stuck their hands out in front of them. "All right, photo being taken in 1, 2, 3. The mother snapped the photo. She flipped the phone around to show the two of them. Anthony jumped up and down while Tony smiled, lightly rubbing his fingers across his palms. I love it so much. Thank you, Tony Stark." "Of course, kid. It's a pretty cool photo if I do say so myself." Anthony continued jumping for a few more seconds. Eventually he stopped and glanced between him and his mom. The mother looked over at Tony, then back at the kid and said, "Maybe you should tell him the thing you've wanted to say, bud." Tony looked over at Anthony. "You wanted to tell me something? I've got time, so you don't have to worry about that." Anthony nodded and stayed quiet for a few more seconds, quietly rocking. Eventually, he said a small, "Thank you." Tony tilted his head. Anthony stared at the tangle while he spoke. "I'm autistic, and I've been bullied because of it. My new school is better, but my first one I was bullied all the time. Kids would push me and shove me and call me names. They would scream in my ear because I would start crying, and they thought it was funny." Tony glanced up at the mother to see her tear up. He looked back over at him and said, "God, I'm sorry, Anthony. That's terrible." Anthony shrugged. They don't do that at my new school, but I've only been there a year since we moved, so I still feel pretty terrible about it all. He glanced back at his mom, then back over at Tony. Thank you for coming out as autistic. Tony froze, his heart skipped a beat. Oh? Anthony nodded. I've always liked Iron Man. He was always my favourite of the Avengers. I'm not good like you, but I like to do coding and program video games. My mom is an engineer, so having a superhero in all tech gear is super cool to me. He then frowned. People at my old school used to say to me that I could never be like you because of my autism, and that autistic people could never be successful. Then you came out as autistic, told the world that, and it made me so happy. Anthony wiped his eyes, along with his mother. Seeing my favourite person, who isn't my mum or my older sister, say they're autistic and struggled, but got out of it, I felt hope for the first time. Tony swallowed the lump in his throat. Hope for what? Hope that I can be like you. Not exactly like you. I could never fly around in suits. But hope that I can be successful. Hope I can be an adult and be okay. Hope that I can be happy being autistic. Anthony glanced up. Like you. Tony smiled brightly. His hands started flapping lightly by his sides. Can I hug you, Anthony? The teen gasped and nodded rapidly. Yes, please and thank you, Tony Stark. Tony chuckled and wrapped his arms around him, hugging the boy tight. He took that time to wipe away the tears forming on his eyes. Once they stepped away, he said to him, I'll keep it real with you, kid. Some things don't get easier. Sometimes people just suck and they say mean things to you for no reason. Tony shakily sighed. You two are differently abled. You're taking away resources from people who have it way worse off than you. Tony Stark is everyone's a little... You're faking. Liar. Tony looked back at the boy. But knowing there are people who believe in you, who simply just believe you, and the hope that things will get better, sometimes that's all you need. Anthony smiles wide and gives Tony another hug. He runs back to his mom. As they walk away, he says, Thanks you for giving me hope, Tony Stark. Thank you for giving me hope, kid. Work 7. It's not an excuse, it's a reason. He's out of coffee. Fuck. Tony has an addiction to coffee, one of the only addictions he's had in his life that he's not ashamed of, but that's besides the point. Tony loves his coffee. He's had many different kinds of coffee from many different places, although his favourite one, and the one he keeps at home, is an original traditional Italian, dark roast coffee from the Bean Coffee Company. The smooth bitter flavour with a hint of his mother's heritage always brought him a sense of comfort, familiarity. But now he's out of coffee. At first he doesn't freak out, at least not too much. He's down in the lab since it's one of Peter's lab days, and he's been going down there a lot working on projects, so he goes upstairs to the kitchen to get the bag from there. He opens the cupboard that usually holds the coffee bag. It's not there. Tony, almost frantically, looks in every cupboard in the kitchen. Once, twice, 3 times. Still no coffee. He groans and rapidly taps his hands on the counter, trying to think of anywhere else he would put a bag of coffee grounds. Nowhere. He was out of coffee. It is at this point where Peter shows up for lab. He walks in and sees Tony in the kitchen and smiles wide. Hi, Mr. Stark. His smile immediately turns to concern when he processes the state he's in. Half of the kitchen cabinets are open, Tony very clearly upset, anxiously stimming. Peter walks over and asks, What's wrong? Tony looked up and sighed, doing a small wave. Hey, kid. Tony sighed again, this time running his hands through his hair. It's stupid. It's not stupid if it's making you upset, Mr. Stark. It's not making me upset. Peter bit back from responding with, Yes, it clearly is. Instead, he said, OK, I still want to know why you're... He waved his hand up and down at Tony, not knowing what word to say. Tony once again ran his hand through his hair, then stood up properly to say, I'm completely out of coffee. There was none down in the lab, and apparently there's none up here either. Oh no, Peter frowned. I'm sorry, Mr. Stark. Tony rolled his eyes. Thanks, kid, but I don't need to be patronised. I'm not patronising you, I'm being genuine. Tony had no response to that. The two were quiet for a few seconds before Peter asks, "Is your coffee sold in stores? Because if it is, we could run to the store before we start to get your coffee." "It is sold in stores." He liked it because if he was running low and he couldn't get the £5 bag delivered quick enough, he could go to the store and get a couple of the £1 bags to fill in for the time the £5 bag was being delivered. The only reason he's hesitant is because it's lab time. A good chunk of their time doing lab work would be taken away by this coffee run, plus it's a change of routine. But he can't do lab without his coffee. Tony glanced over at the kid. "Are you sure that's okay?" "Yeah, I'm sure," Peter smiled. "I've had a good week, so I'll be able to handle the slight change of plans." That reassured Tony. He was happy to know it wouldn't cause Peter any distress. As for himself, though, he shook off those feelings and smiled back at Peter. "All right, I'll go get my wallet and keys, and then we'll stop at the nearest grocery store, all right?" "Got it." Peter bounced up and down. Tony went to his bedroom and grabbed the items he needed, as well as grabbing a hat for some extra disguise. He met Peter back down in the common room before heading down to the garage and getting in one of Tony's cars. The two drove off to the nearest grocery store, which was luckily a short drive, even with the NYC traffic. During the car ride, Peter blabbered on about his day in school. "I got an A on my history test, Mr. Stark." "That's awesome, kid." They eventually arrived at the grocery store and made their way inside. Peter continued to talk about school, now telling him about the conversations him, Ned and MJ had at lunch. Tony quietly listened as he weaved his way through aisles to get to where the coffee was stocked. They got to the aisle and headed down. Tony walked down to where they stock the Bean coffee products, taking a shaky breath when he noticed how limited their stock was. The two looked at every single bag. No. They read the labels over and over again, moving the bags that were up front to look at the bags in the back. No again. It wasn't in the store. Peter looked at Tony worryingly, who at this point was clenching his fists beside him. "Maybe check online?" "Still not going to solve the problem of it not being here now." Tony would later regret how he said it, not recognising in the moment how rude it sounded. Instead, he begrudgingly took out his phone and went on the company's website. He scrolled until he found the coffee he liked. "Sold out. Will restock Sunday." Today was Wednesday. And even then, once Sunday arrives, it usually takes them a week to ship out the order and have it delivered. So at best he won't get his coffee for another week and a half, at worst, 2 weeks or more. Tony squeezed his eyes shut and clenched his fist, the hand around his phone also going into a tighter grip. Peter once again looked at him concerned. "Mr. Stark?" Instead of talking, Tony handed the phone to him. Peter looked at the screen and read the same message Tony did. "Oh." Tony crossed an arm in front of his chest, the other arm on top of that, with that hand spread across his face. His foot was also rapidly tapping. He was starting to panic. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't go potentially 2 weeks without coffee. Panicking over coffee. Pathetic. Peter handed Tony back his phone. "Could you maybe get the traditional French roast one instead? I don't know how different it is, but—" "French is bitter. Different roasting times. Italian tastes a lot stronger." Peter bit his lip while Tony said what he wanted to say. Once he finished, Peter started again. "It might be better to get the French roast coffee from this brand that you like, rather than a similar flavour but from a completely different company." He rocked in silence, then looked down. "Or, I don't know, whatever you think is best." The thing is, Peter isn't wrong. He used to get their French roast before the Italian, and he enjoyed it, but he much prefers the Italian, and the French roast just isn't the same. He stood there for a while trying to think of what to do, when he suddenly remembered that he was freaking out over a type of coffee. Tony, almost aggressively, snatched 2 of the French roasts off the shelf. "Let's go." "Oh, okay." The two walked back to the front of the store to check out. Tony was quiet the whole walk, gripping the coffee bags like they personally attacked him somehow. Peter kept glancing up at the man, his concern and worry becoming increasingly apparent on his face. He pulled out a Stim toy he had in his pocket, a marble mesh to be exact, and stimmed with that. He was feeling a lot of tension right now. He couldn't imagine how Tony was feeling. Tony was berating himself in his head. How could you be this upset over coffee? Get over yourself. Who in their self-respecting mind would cry over getting a different kind of coffee? Wait a minute. He wipes his eyes, feeling them sting with tears. Yep, he's crying because of coffee. He takes a deep breath, trying to calm himself down. You're okay. Calm down. It's literally just coffee. He leads them to the self-checkout line, not wanting to embarrass himself in front of a cashier. He pays for the coffee grounds and quickly heads out the store. He gets to the car and tosses the coffee bags in the back seat. In the corner of his eye, he sees Peter get in the passenger seat. Shit, we still have lab. Tony shakily takes a deep breath and reminds himself, lab time is fun. Don't let some stupid coffee roast ruin it for you. Then gets in the driver's seat. Tony drives them back to the tower, trying to ignore Peter's worried glances at him. He's fine, it's just some coffee. Once they arrive, the two immediately head to the lab. Tony tells Peter to get started, and he heads over to the coffee pot. He stares at the bags. The packaging's the same, the only difference being the French roast instead of Italian. He likes French roast coffee. He even likes this brand's version of it. So why does he still not want it? A part of him wishes he never went out, so he never had to see it out of stock. But then he thinks about how he always makes himself a new cup of coffee before lab. He always does. Couldn't he have gone one day, though, without this? If it weren't for that, he wouldn't be in this mess. Why did this have to be a mess anyway? It's just coffee. It's just coffee. Why do I keep freaking out over coffee? Probably because it's one of your safe foods and we went out of routine. Tony flinched and turned around, looking over at Peter. Peter seemed to not notice the flinch and kept talking. I guess coffee isn't really a food though, so safe drinks? That sounded weird. Did I say that out loud? Tony interrupted. About the coffee thing. Peter bit his lip and nodded. Yeah, sorry, Mr. Stark. Tony waved it off and sighed. He tossed the bags on the table and sat on the couch next to it, putting his head in his hands. Peter slowly gets up, walks over and sits beside him. He asked, Are you okay? Tony huffed out a laugh, moving his hands away from his face to now start rubbing them. No, which is stupid. It's not stupid, Mr. Stark. Kind of feels like it is. But it's not, though. I told you, coffee is one of your safe drinks. What does that even mean? Safe drinks, or more often you'll hear safe foods, are foods that autistic people deem as, well, safe. They can also be called same foods, Peter said. They're kind of like a comfort item. It's something an autistic person can consistently eat or drink and not have to worry about the texture or the taste. A lot of people have bread or mac and cheese as a safe food. It's also kind of like a favourite food, but sometimes, especially when you're going through a burnout or having a meltdown, it can be the only thing you want to eat or drink. Okay, Tony said, tapping his foot. Doesn't explain why I'm freaking out over my supposed safe drink. Well, that's where routine and being resistant to change comes into play, Peter explained. Yes, you have many different types of coffee all over the place, but at home you know and expect it to be this one particular brand or flavour of coffee. Then you find out that you ran out, and not only did you run out, it happened on a lab day. So you have to disrupt your routine of lab time to go to the grocery store to get more. Once you get there, though, it only becomes worse because the flavour you specifically get at home is out of stock, so you're forced to get a flavour you don't normally get. Peter looked up at Tony. So not only was your routine disrupted, you also had to deal with the sudden change of not having your regular safe coffee for the next week or two. Tony listened to what Peter said. He tried to take it in, but he just sighed. It still feels ridiculous. Tony ran his hands through his hair, punched his legs a couple of times, then clenched his fists. There's no excuse for me to get this worked up about some... He punched his leg again. Stupid coffee. Peter quickly grabbed the pillow on the couch and handed it over to Tony. It's not an excuse, Mr. Stark. He felt relieved when Tony grabbed the pillow and squeezed it. It's a reason. Tony put his face against the pillow and took deep breaths, trying to get himself to calm down. Without realising, he slowly started rocking, which helped him relax. He heard Peter get up and walk somewhere. When he heard him come back, Tony looked up. Peter handed him a bike chain fidget, which Tony took, feeling grateful. Peter sat back down and the two quietly stimmed. Peter grabbed himself a tangle while getting the bike chain for Tony. After a few minutes, Peter spoke up again. You know and accept that you're autistic, Mr. Stark, right? Tony shakily sighed. I do know, and most days I accept it. I still have moments, though. He sadly chuckled. Clearly. It's okay, Peter said while nodding his head. Being autistic, it affects every part of our lives, even small things. So yes, maybe to a neurotypical person, getting upset over having to get a different kind of coffee seems inconsequential or ridiculous. But like I said to you before, it wasn't just a different kind of coffee. It was a disruption of your routine and being confronted with change. Two things very commonly known to be things autistic people struggle with. Our minds think and process the world differently, so we have to try to not hold ourselves to the standards of neurotypical people. Tony smirked. Easier said than done. I know, I struggle with it too, Peter said, looking up at Tony. I was also late diagnosed, so I probably have a lot of the same thoughts you probably do. He then paused. Granted, I was diagnosed way earlier than you, and have been diagnosed for longer. Plus, I've always had a harder time masking, and I don't have shitty parents. Okay, I get it. Tony put a hand on Peter's shoulder to get him to stop rambling. Also, my mum tried. She wasn't perfect, especially when I was a teen, but it wasn't her fault. Peter nodded. Sorry, Mr. Stark. It's okay, kid. He moved his hand and went back to stimming with the bike chain fidget. Tony still had some feelings of shame, a voice in his head saying that he should grow up and not cry over something small and stupid. But he reminded himself that Peter is right. He is autistic. He processes the world differently, so something that may seem small to someone could be a big deal to him. He takes a deep breath. It's okay. You're allowed to be upset over coffee. You're not neurotypical. Your brain doesn't process the world like them, so even something small can be a genuine struggle. Because it is, and that's okay. It's not an excuse. It's a reason. Tony takes another deep breath. He looks over at Peter, who's quietly stimming with the tangle. He says, Sorry for being a bit of a mess. He looks down at his watch to check the time. And for wasting over an hour of lab time. It's okay, Mr. Stark, Peter smiled. As I said, my week has been good, so overall I don't feel too bad. He looked up. How are you feeling? Tony smiled. Better. He paused, then added on, You know this will probably happen again. Not the coffee thing specifically, but the... Tony trailed off. Internalized ableism? Yeah, that. I know, it sucks, especially when you're trapped in like an internalized ableism loop, Peter grimaced. It sucks that it's part of being autistic, and worse in the case of a late diagnosed autistic. That's why, though it's important to find a community, to have someone understand your struggles so they can help you when you're feeling down or doubting yourself. Tony chuckled and rolled his eyes. That's cheesy, kid. He looked over at him with a fond smile. Peter giggled. Yeah, well, he shrugged. I like cheese. Tony laughed. Shortly after their talk, the two worked on a smaller project during lab time since they didn't have as much time as usual. Tony still couldn't get himself to drink the coffee the rest of the night. Over the next 2 weeks, he ended up having only a small cup of coffee in the morning, then the one he always makes before lab time. The rest of the time he had water and smoothies. He felt off during those 2 weeks, partly because of the slight caffeine withdrawal he was experiencing, but also because of the change in coffee flavour. Thanks to Peter, and Pepper when he told her what was happening, he was able to remind himself that this was normal. It was normal for him. That it's okay something small like a type of coffee could make him upset, as he was autistic. He just processes the world differently, and that's okay. Then 2 weeks later, he came back from his meeting and saw boxes of the coffee, his coffee, sitting on the floor. The relief he felt was immeasurable, and that's okay too. Work 8. Tony's journal entry. So, hi. Rhodey told me that this could help, write out my feelings and shit, since I can't talk about them or whatever. So I guess I'll give it a shot. Don't tell Rhodey this, but he tends to be right. God, it feels weird to pretend this is a real person. It's just a notebook, but whatever. My parents died 3 months ago. Car crash. Mom and Howard are gone. I was a fucking wreck that day, as most would expect. Maybe a little overdramatic, but hey, it's me. I cried, I screamed, hit myself. The typical things I do when I'm upset. Rhodey took me out for burgers. That was nice. I don't think I told him that, though. I didn't talk for most of the day. Obviously, I told him what happened, then I just stopped talking. Another one of the annoying things that happen when I get upset, but besides the point. Basically, I was a mess that day. Then I just kinda became numb. Okay, well, I did get shit-faced the next day. I think Rhodey was just glad I didn't have any coke, but again, that's besides the point. What I'm trying to say is that I reacted pretty normally when your parents fucking die while you're way too young to function. But now, I don't know, I feel like I've already moved on, and it annoys me. When your parents die, especially when you're only 21 and can barely function as is, you're supposed to be upset, right? This was only 3 months ago. The last time I felt anything about their deaths was at the funeral, and it was just me being pissed off at Howard for crashing the damn car. I should be having some sort of reaction, right? Rhodey says that I'm throwing myself into work, not allowing myself to grieve. But I always work. Even when I'm happy I work. Plus, I'm now the CEO of Stark Industries, so I kinda have to work. Obi is saying that I'm handling everything amazingly, proud that I'm not breaking down like usual and moving on from everything. Which is true, but it shouldn't be. Rhodey has to be right. I'm not allowing myself to grieve, but it scares me that I feel like there's nothing to grieve. I don't feel anything about their deaths anymore, other than small bursts of anger at how they died, but not that they're dead in the first place. Okay, there is another thing that pisses me off, which ties into what Obi said to me. I have reacted so much worse to the tiniest of quote-unquote problems, and yet have barely a reaction to something much more important. Like when I was a kid, I remember having temper tantrums over the feelings of certain suits I was forced to wear, or those public freakouts I had whenever the damn paparazzi showed up. I still hate the paparazzi. I started wearing sunglasses sometimes while going out, and that's helped a bit. Still can't handle all the shouting, but it's mostly solved the flashing lights issue, which is good. Or maybe it's not good. Why am I in my damn 20s and having to wear sunglasses on cloudy days, or even at fucking night, just to handle some cameras? It feels so stupid. There are so many things about me that feel stupid. The stupid hand movements I do, the rules that everyone just knows but I can't get through my stupid head, the stupid breakdowns over stupid shit. I'm supposed to be a fucking genius, and yet all I do is act stupid. This is why I like being high and shit-faced. People like me better that way. Okay, Rhodey doesn't, and there's been a couple of times where Obi has to warn me about ruining the company's image or whatever. But I just seem to know how to people better. People like me more when I'm wasted, so I don't see a point in me trying and failing to learn shit when I seemingly have it all figured out after a line of coke and a bottle of vodka. I've completely gone off track, I'm rambling at this point. The point is that normal people don't cry over lights as an adult. They don't scream at their fathers every time a piece of clothing is itchy. They don't freak out when a class they don't even like gets cancelled half an hour before the starting time, and just stand there like they're some weirdo figuring out what they're supposed to do. Normal people don't freak out over stupid shit. What they do freak out over is when someone they care about dies. Yet I don't. Maybe Howard was right calling me heartless and narcissistic. I cry over things that don't even matter in the end because guess what? I'm lucky. Boo-hoo, I'm overwhelmed at college. Just ignore the fact I'm 15 at a private research university and helping my father run one of the most successful companies in the world, in which I will and now have inherited. I'm lucky, yet I still whine and cry over pointless shit. I wish I knew what was wrong with me. I've known something's been wrong since I started boarding school. I of course had a freak out over the uniforms, and on the first day I asked some classmates about it, if it felt itchy and tight to them, and they just laughed. I think I even asked a kid that was around my age, and they just looked confused. I don't understand, and I fucking hate that I don't. I feel like if someone just came up to me and told me, Hey, here's a word that perfectly describes everything that's wrong about you. It would make things a lot easier. But I don't know if there is. I don't think there is. I think I'm just fucked up. I don't feel things the way other people do, how I'm supposed to feel. I just feel things wrong. I am wrong. Everything about me as a person is wrong. So yeah, Howard was right. As usual. And in this case, Rhodey is wrong. I feel like shit. I'm going to throw this away and never do this again. Maybe I'll burn it. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. And I'll probably drink. I hate feeling things. Work 9. Growing beyond the seed. Good afternoon, Mr. Stark. Afternoon, Miss Owens. Soon after getting diagnosed, yet after the whole leaking incident had settled, Tony sought after a therapist. Well, more accurately, the psychologist had called Tony, once more recommending one, and Pepper urged him. It still took another month of convincing. He never liked the idea of talking to a stranger about his problems, and having his diagnosis leaked to the world didn't help things, but he eventually realised it was for the best. Even if he still ignored the autism, there was still a shit ton of trauma he's experienced throughout his entire life that certainly doesn't make his life easy. Plus, Peter wrote a whole PowerPoint on how therapy has helped him, with videos from Pepper, Rhodey, and even Damn Happy all telling him in their special, unique ways that he really needed to see a therapist. Please, Tony, go see a therapist. Come on, man, you've needed one for years. Just listen to the kid and do it already. Get help. So, he finally listened. He eventually found Dr. Though she told him she just prefers Ms. Nicole Owens, originally getting her PhD in psychology so she could diagnose children and adults with autism. She then realised just how much she wanted to help them, especially the adults, and not just slap a diagnosis and send them away. So she opened up her own practice to do just that, helping late realised autistic individuals navigate the world with this new discovery. She also went back to school to take classes on trauma and how that could affect autistic individuals. Needless to say, Tony was impressed, so he started seeing her. How's your work been? Tony sighed. He leaned back on the plush couch, reaching over to the end table, which had a bucket full of fidgets and sensory-related items. He grabbed the textured monkey noodle, the ends of it having heads and tail of a dinosaur. He ran it through his hands, then rolled it up and squeezed it. Tony really liked this fidget during therapy. It was nice to stim with on its own, but Tony noticed how he'd often get antsy during the heavier talks, so his stimming with said fidget would get more aggressive, so to speak. It's often how Ms. Owens was able to tell a topic was getting serious. He would start off stimming like he was currently, running it through his hands with an occasional squeeze, but the more uncomfortable a topic got, he would start picking at the little rubber spikes, or twisting it around his hands so tightly to the point where Ms. Owens didn't know if she should be concerned about the toy breaking, or Tony cutting off circulation, which only made her more concerned when after a few seconds of the simple stimming, he started picking at the rubber spikes. Tony sat in silence a little longer, now twisting the toy around his thumb. He sighed once more. Not great. Ms. Owens tilted her head with a frown, staying quiet for a few seconds. She always allows her clients time to process questions, or build up the courage to answer one, giving them a push when needed. Tony didn't need a push that time, however, eventually following up with, I had meltdowns this week, multiple ones. I'm so sorry, Tony, that's horrible, Ms. Owens empathised. Do you think you can explain the causes of those meltdowns? Tony set the fidget down on his lap and rubbed his hands across his face. It was just an insanely busy and tough week. I had 5 meetings at work this week, with 3 of them being incredibly frustrating and annoying. The other 2 were boring as shit and should have been an email. He rolled his eyes and picked back up the fidget, twisting it across his fingers and palms. The Accords meeting ended up being moved when Peter and I normally have lab time because of some thing Ross had to attend to. He mimicked quotation marks when he said the word thing, rolling his eyes as well. Then the day we moved lab day to, Peter woke up throwing up, so we had to cancel again. He squeezed his eyes shut. And at the end of it all, Pepper and I got into an argument. Ms. Owens frowned. About? Misunderstandings, basically, he replied, opening his eyes. He shrugged and picked the rubber spikes. She came down to the lab to talk to me about something. I don't even remember what, and I was just sitting there. Can't remember if I was on my phone or just staring off into space, but I wasn't doing any work. She got mad because of that, saying I can't just continue to slack off. I kept saying I was trying, even though I wasn't doing anything, yada yada yada. Long story short, the argument ended up with me having a meltdown. Tony glanced up to see a worried expression on the therapist's face. Don't worry, Doc, it got resolved. He looked back down at the fidget. After the meltdown, we sat together in silence for a while, and she explained her side, that she was already mad and stressed because of her own bullshit meetings, and dealing with arseholes who kept pushing certain projects back. Then coming down to see me doing nothing was just the final nail in the coffin, or whatever phrase she said. He sighed, rubbing his eyes as he felt the exhaustion coming back. I told her about my week, about how this was my third or fourth meltdown, and she forced me to take a couple of days off. I'm glad to hear you got the argument sorted out, Ms. Owen smiled, then asked, How many days off did you take? Only 2, Tony replied, because there is a prototype for a product that needs to be done by the end of the week, which thankfully I'm on the final touches of now. That's good to hear, Ms. Owen smiled again. Were the 2 days off helpful at all? Do you feel like you've gotten some energy back? Tony stayed quiet for a while, so she added on, It's okay if you felt like it wasn't helpful, or you don't know if it was or not. No, it did help, Tony quickly answered. I felt kind of bad at first, but I needed it, so... He shrugged. Ms. Owens tilted her head. Felt kind of bad how? He sighed. Well, I mean, I knew I was supposed to be working, so the fact I wasn't threw me off a little. He bit his cheek. Then, internalised ableism came in. He heard Ms. Owens hum, and he looked up to see her nodding her head. He smirked. Expected to hear that? She smirked as well and shrugged. Maybe. Been doing this a long time. Tony chuckled. He moved himself on the couch so he was laying across it, facing the wall. There were the typical thoughts. Get over yourself, you should be working. You're overreacting, normal people don't do this. Same old, same old. He sighed, then let out a small smile. I did recognise these thoughts, though, was able to stop them. You did? When Tony nodded to confirm, Ms. Owens smiled brightly. That's awesome, I'm incredibly proud of you. And she was, even if Tony looked away, his face showing that he believed otherwise. Tony cleared his throat, then told her, I had other thoughts as well. She quizzically looked at him. What kinds of thoughts? A hint of concern was present in her voice. Tony, then realising how bad his words sounded, clarified. They weren't bad. Well, I don't know if they are necessarily positive, just... They aren't what you're thinking of, Tony sighed, rubbing his face and mumbled. Ugh, I'm making things sound worse. It's all right, Tony, she said. Tell me the thoughts you did have. He took a deep breath. He moved the fidget across his palm so he could feel the soft rubber texture. Tony took some time thinking about how he would word the thoughts he had. Then eventually he told her. I kept thinking about when I was younger. I knew something was wrong, different about me for a long time. He paused. There's a part of me that just wishes I knew. He swallowed the lump in his throat. There were so many things I struggled with as a kid, and I felt like if I knew, if I was diagnosed as a child, so many things in my life would have been easier. Tony squeezed his eyes shut, the grip on the toy tightening. I also know my father was a piece of shit, and if he had a word to describe my weirdness... He huffed out a laugh, dark and cold. Well, there's a good chance I'd be in some nut house somewhere on the brink of death. He knew the words he was saying were harsh and probably incorrect in some ways, but in that moment he didn't care. He felt angry. Tony opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. It's unfair. It's unfair that no matter what I could have been diagnosed, I still would have had a shitty life, which makes me wish I was never autistic at all. Tears started leaking out of his eyes. That would have made everything better. No fucked up child, no father who wishes the worst out of you, no struggles, nothing would be wrong or unbelievably fucked up. Tony's voice cracked and the tears fell. He quickly wiped his cheek, putting his heels of his palms against his eyes to try to stop them. He felt the energy inside him boil up, and he growled. Tony sat back up and rocked, wrapping his arms around his legs and putting his head on his knees. His eyes being free allowed him to silently cry. Ms. Owens watched silently as she got up to grab a couple of things: a pillow, a tablet, and a bottle of water. She walked over and sat beside the couch, quietly counting through the 4-square breathing technique. After a few minutes, Tony raised his head up, wiping his face. Ms. Owens handed over the 3 items to him. First, the water, which he took a sip of and handed it back. The second was the pillow, which Tony punched a couple of times to take out some more energy. He then released a deep breath and placed the pillow against his chest. Last off was the tablet, which Tony took with a confused look on his face. He turned it on, and what popped up was an app that had a bunch of words on the bottom, a place to type out a sentence on top, and on the side a speaker button. He looked up at her confused, and she told him, "In case you're unable to speak, you can type out a sentence and it'll say it out loud to me." Tony nodded and looked back at the screen. He tapped on the top line and a keyboard came up, typing out a sentence, then pressing the speaker button. The tablet voiced out, "I'm sorry." "It's okay, Tony, there's nothing to apologise for. Not for breaking down, not for anything you said. There are no apologies needed." Ms. Owens softly smiled at him. "Now I do have some thoughts on the matter. If you want to and are ready to hear them, you can let me know by typing out or saying, 'ready.' If that's not okay too. We still have time left in this session, so if you need that time to recover, that's perfectly fine by me. Just let me know." Tony nodded, setting the tablet down and wrapping his arms around the pillow. He saw Ms. Owens stand up and walk back over to her desk, hearing occasional ruffles of papers. After a few minutes, he picked the tablet back up, typing out and having it speak. "Ready." Ms. Owens looked over at Tony and nodded. While she moved back over to her chair, Tony repositioned himself again to be sitting up, body facing towards her, yet still hugging the pillow close to his chest. She sat down and spoke softly. "I want to start out by saying all of the thoughts and feelings you just expressed are normal. I cannot tell you how many clients I have that have expressed a wish of getting diagnosed as a child. After discovering something that can perfectly explain everything you do and have done, it's completely understandable why they wish they could have known about it their whole life. I also cannot tell you how many of them felt angered by the fact it still might not have made things easier because of their home life." She sighed. "I understand why you may wish to never be autistic. The world was not built for autistic people to thrive, and too many people lack basic respect for all human beings. Just remember, though, that it is never your fault for what your father did to you. You were a child, and even if you were being disrespectful in his eyes, all arguments against you got thrown away the moment he put his hands on you and attacked. No child, no matter how rude or disrespectful they may appear to be, ever deserves to be abused." Tony swallowed the lump in his throat and gave a small nod. Ms. Owens softly smiled. She continued by saying, "We don't know what your childhood would have been like if you were diagnosed young. Sure, there is a strong chance your father would have reacted poorly to it. There's also a chance that he could have reacted positively to the news and sought out help that would have benefited you greatly." She heard Tony snort, yet she continued, "He also could have found help that could cause even worse damage. Maybe your mother would have left him and raised you on her own. Maybe they would have both abandoned you and another family would raise you. There are so many what-if scenarios we could come up with. Yet ultimately none of that matters, because we do not know, and unless you invent a time machine to go back and tell him, we will never know. Here's what we do know. You're autistic, you've had multiple rough patches in your life, in large part due to you not knowing, and now that you do know, you're working towards making your life better." Tony started typing on the tablet again, Ms. Owens noticing how he would sometimes pause and delete what he wrote. After a minute of typing, he pressed the speaker button and it said, "It still feels unfair. I know I'm supposed to learn and grow from my childhood, and sure, not everything was bad. Jarvis was always there for me and my mom tried her best, but it still feels unfair." "It is unfair, Tony," Ms. Owens stated. "It can be unfair, and you can have great moments. You can have quote-unquote daddy issues, yet you still have an amazing father figure. Multiple things can be true at once. You can learn about what made your childhood difficult, what you can do to prevent it from happening to possible future children. You can grow beyond this time and no longer feel burdened by it, and yet it can still be an unfair childhood. Tony set the tablet aside and rubbed his eyes, taking in all the information. He hugged at the pillow again, picking at the seams. "How do I grow?" Tony asked, a grumble in his voice making it seem like he hasn't talked in years. "How do I move on?" Well, you can't really move on from trauma. Trauma changes you. It becomes a part of you. You can't move on from something that has greatly affected you. That's why I've been saying that you can and will grow beyond your trauma. An apple will always grow from a seed, and the seeds will forever be part of the apple, but there's so much more to the apple than its seeds. Does that make sense? She asked. Tony pondered the statement for a second. My trauma are the seeds and I am an apple. He chuckled at the thought. The seeds are still in the apple, but an apple can grow away from the seeds, making it more apple than seed. So, while my trauma is still in me, I can grow beyond it to a point where I'm more than just my trauma. Ms. Owens smiled. You got it. Tony smiled back. Growing beyond childhood trauma is tough for anyone, and your autism might make things like processing said trauma even more difficult. But you've recognised your struggles, you sought out professional help, and you have a strong support system behind you. Ms. Owens nodded. I think you'll be okay. Tony's smile grew wider as he set the pillow beside him. You know, I originally came in here thinking we'd be talking about the meltdowns. Didn't realise it would turn into talking about childhood trauma. Ms. Owens shrugged. That's therapy for you. The two of them chuckled, then she said, We can certainly talk about them more in depth next week, although we have run out of time for today. No, it's okay. Tony stood up. I needed to hear those things. He walked over to the door, stopping just before leaving and saying, Thank you, Miss Owens. Of course. Have a great rest of your day, Tony. Ms. Owens smiled at him. He smiled back. You too. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, please consider subscribing. Have a lovely day.